A young mother on the verge of a new beginning.
She always used to talk about her wedding. She had everything planned out.
She was gonna be living the life that she's always dreamt of having.
Violently struck down.
Not just homicide, but an act of rage.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that.
Police chase a deranged killer down a sinister path.
He was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. Someone burnt the house down.
Through a maze of twisted theories.
Maybe this was a retaliation.
That was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
Until the case takes a mind-bending turn.
He looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong."
That person never was on our radar.
Just an epic, epic tragedy.
I was almost in disbelief.
That's just something that was entirely unexpected from the beginning.
Until we try to rule them in or rule them out, I don't know that any of us are safe.
On Sunday, August 10th, 2014, in an upper-middle-class neighborhood in Jackson, Michigan, a quiet morning is broken by a desperate phone call.
Our dispatch did receive a 911 call from a panicked individual.
911.
Yeah, I need somebody up to my house right now. My fiance, I think she's dead.
Okay, so has she been sick?
No, there's blood everywhere.
Do you know where it's coming from?
I don't know.
Okay, can you tell if she's breathing?
She's not. She's cold. She's dead. Oh my God.
Police race to the home just before 11 a.m., where they're greeted by the caller and 3 young girls.
He had said that the deceased body was up in a bedroom upstairs. There was 2 bedrooms that we walked past, which were bedrooms where the kids had been sleeping.
With the 3 children who lived there safely out of the house and the crime scene locked down, detectives come upon a grisly sight.
As we enter the bedroom, then we do see the body. It was slumped down between the bed and the wall. And there was quite a bit of blood. At that point, we see zip ties on her hands, and we see what appears to be several stab marks.
A zip tie was wrapped around each wrist, with another looped through it and cut, as though she'd been strapped to the bed and then cut loose.
We, at that point, determined we likely had a homicide.
The police talk to Eric Wolf, who placed the 911 call. He tells them the victim is his fiancée, 28-year-old Frances Craig. He also makes a startling admission.
He said that he had worked all night, so when he came home, after finding Franny in the condition she was in, he then went downstairs and slept on the recliner chair. For whatever reason, he did not call 911 until a couple hours later in the morning.
Frances's 2 daughters and Eric's little girl were all in the house at the time. While Eric slept, his 10-year-old child walked into a horrifying scene.
Eric's daughter, Lexi, went into the bedroom and clearly could tell that something was amiss. She even touched her and could tell that she was not moving. I think she might even have described her as a little cold.
Lexi went downstairs and woke up her father. And that's when he finally called 911.
We all felt that a normal, average individual would, at the bare minimum, make sure their fiancé, the person they're about to get married to and spend the rest of their life with, is okay.
Eric's decision to walk away from the murder scene is a red flag for investigators. And so is his casual demeanor.
When Eric was interviewed by one of the other detectives at the scene initially, the detective said he didn't seem too concerned, didn't seem too upset about what had happened.
Detectives plan to grill Eric about his suspicious behavior. But first, they need to finish processing the crime scene.
There was approximately 90 stab wounds, and they were in a very aggressive manner.
It was overkill. Not just committing a homicide, but an act of rage where it's over the top.
The rule of thumb is on a situation where there's multiple, and I'm talking more than a dozen stab wounds, it's usually a crime of passion. So at that point, you typically look at somebody close to the victim.
Investigators sift through the bloody mess for clues. There's no sign of a murder weapon, but plenty of signs of conflict.
The crime lab, which is the CSI people, they responded to the scene. They were there for multiple hours, collecting a ton of evidence.
While the forensics team works the scene inside. Shocked friends and family have gathered outside the house.
I didn't believe her. I thought it was a lie. It's not real. It didn't happen.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that. Frances was just an amazing person all around. Frances and I worked together. We hung out outside of work together. We would hang out with our kids.
Investigators learned that Frances had 2 daughters with an ex-boyfriend. The oldest is 5 years old, and the youngest is 3.
Our boyfriends actually were friends, and he brought her to my house one day, and that was like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It felt like we've known each other for years. She's a wonderful, amazing mom, the best mom that I know. She was the best person I've ever met and known in my life.
She would do anything for anyone.
Frances and the father of her children broke up, but she still dreamed of getting married.
She always used to talk about her wedding and everything, and at this point, she didn't even have a boyfriend. She had everything planned out.
Dreams became reality in 2012 when she started dating 29-year-old Eric Wolf.
Eric was a divorced single father, 1 young child. He had primary custody over her.
2 years into the relationship, Eric and Frances moved in together. Despite working 2 jobs, Frances did all she could to make time for her children and Eric's daughter, too.
She was constantly doing things with her girls when she wasn't working. Even with her stepdaughter, she was amazing.
Her days were long, but her life was full. Eric proposed, and the couple bought a house together.
Frances was very, very excited about getting married. Like, every day she was tagging me on Facebook or, like, sending me pictures. You know, she thought she was gonna be living the life that she's always dreamt of having and having that fairy tale wedding.
But when detectives pressed Franny's friends, they learned that Eric had a dark side.
They told me that they weren't super fond of her fiance.
Because my daughter spent a lot of time with Frances. She was like a second mother to my daughter. And my daughter did tell me several times of Eric being kind of like a drill sergeant. He seemed real cocky, just everything was about him and his daughter more so than Frances and her girls. I felt in my gut from the moment I found out that something happened to Frances, I felt like Eric had something to do with it. I didn't know what, I didn't know how, I didn't know why. I just felt like it was because of him that she's gone.
Police are determined to get to the bottom of Eric's suspicious behavior.
When we interview him, he stated when he saw her in the condition she was in, he did not call 911, and he didn't seem too upset about what had happened. At that point, he was somebody, definitely a person of interest in the homicide of Franny Craig.
Coming up, Eric's story gets stranger by the minute.
I didn't know if this was, like self-inflicted accident.
That's what we need to find out too.
A tiny clue reveals a big surprise.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
And when police find the killer, it shocks everyone.
I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now.
After calling 911 following the brutal murder of his fiancée, Frances Craig, Eric Wolf is questioned by police about how he discovered his fiancée's body.
I came home this morning because I work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I went upstairs, I checked both the girls' room before going in our bedroom.
Okay, so you came around to the foot of the bed and kind of looked
Yes.
to see where she was at.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay. Did you see anything on the mattress when you first came in?
I saw, I guess I might have saw that streak, but it didn't jump out like blood or anything.
Okay, so you saw something that just didn't jump out to you.
Yeah,
So this is bad.
Eric did not seem to register surprise, anger, hurt, anything that I think we all normally would want to see from a loved one when somebody is killed.
I thought maybe she had been drinking or something because she was in like almost like a funny position on the floor, which she doesn't drink hardly ever. I knew better than to wake her. I know from prior experience whenever I've woken her up, she's not a morning person and I get yelled at.
As the interview creeped close to an hour, Eric suggests a much darker reason for ignoring his fiancée sprawled out on the bedroom floor.
Up until just now, maybe since we've been here, I thought that if it wasn't an accident, then it was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
He indicated that he thought maybe she had committed suicide and just did not want to deal with it at that point. We found that being very odd and a red flag. Typically on a suicide, you'll find one stab wound or one gunshot wound. You won't find multiple stab wounds.
The prospect of Franny inflicting 90 stab wounds with her hands zip-tied sounds preposterous to the police. Even if it was physically possible, why wouldn't Eric have reacted with alarm?
So you didn't want to come to grips with it if she had done so.
Right, because
you don't want to.
To investigators, Eric's shifting story doesn't add up. Why would a woman everyone described as happy and carefree take her own life?
And the only reason I say self-induced is just because of how high-strung everything is right before this wedding, and
it's a lot of stress.
Yeah.
Eric's strange comments could signal that he's traumatized over the death of his fiancée, or that he's hiding something. Determined to mine the truth, detectives decide to go right at their prime suspect.
Did you?
No.
Know what?
No, I didn't do this. I didn't know anything about it. I walked in, and I walked out, went to sleep, got up, went back in, and reported it.
But that brings me back to the questions we just asked. You made it at least halfway into that bedroom.
I did make it, and I admit that, and I'll admit that in front of whoever needs to hear it. But I want to make that perfectly clear that my stance on this is exactly what I said. I went in for whatever reason it was. I didn't react.
Without forensic evidence to hold him, Eric is free to go. But investigators vow to keep their eye on him. And the deeper they look, the more circumstantial evidence starts to build up.
We did do a pretty thorough background, as we always do. And one thing we found out is that Eric did have a little bit of assaultive past with prior girlfriends and an ex-wife. It seems like he has some violent tendencies.
One of the strangest facts in this case is that Eric Wolf has a father who is serving a life sentence in prison for his own first-degree murder conviction.
He was convicted on a cold case homicide investigation in the 90s and was serving life in prison for murder. So that certainly put up a red flag to us.
Was it possible that violent tendencies run in the family? Even if they did, what possible reason would Eric have to want his fiancée dead?
The homicide occurred in August, and I believe their wedding was planned in September. We talked with her parents and her friends. They told me that Franny had had second thoughts, and they were trying to convince her that if she was not prepared to get married, that maybe she should wait. And they also said Eric had had second thoughts. Eric may have got cold feet, didn't want to get married, didn't know how to end the relationship.
While police work diligently to prove Eric's guilt, Francis's friends wait and wonder.
We didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on and what happened with Frances and how she was murdered. We just knew she was dead.
Behind the scenes, police work tirelessly. They obtain a search warrant to collect Francis's and Eric's electronics, but quickly realize that Francis's cell phone is missing.
We do find the cell phone near Franny's house. It had been thrown up against a tree and damaged. Again, we're thinking that the cell phone has some pretty valuable information.
The cellular phone data quite often can be some of the most compelling evidence.
We were able to get the phone records, and nothing really stuck out as being her, Franny communicating with anybody that would give us suspicion.
With no unusual cell phone activity or signs of forced entry on the day of the murder, police stay focused on Eric.
Eric Wolf at the time was at work, and investigators went and checked out, what they could to verify his alibi.
Police checked the company's security cameras.
They do have one entrance. They do have a time card check-in, check-out system. We're able to verify he was at work, or allegedly at work, when the incident occurred. The problem with the system is there's some other exits that they're not supposed to use, but some of them have cameras, but other ones do not.
Was he able to leave his place of employment and get home to commit a murder and have all of that be undetected? Eric was the only person we could figure who would have any reason to want Franny dead.
Police investigating the homicide of 28-year-old Frances Craig cannot confirm her fiancé's alibi. Since not every exit at his workplace had a security camera.
We couldn't rule out that sometime during the night he left and then came back.
Eric's shaky alibi and suspicious behavior at the crime scene doesn't give police enough to arrest him, but it does leave them with a drastic course of action.
If you are operating in a murder investigation thinking that man killed his fiancée in the home where the children were, you are thinking, we want to keep the children safe. We kept Eric's daughter from him while we tried to figure out what happened to Franny.
Both Eric's and Franny's daughters are removed from Eric's home and put in the custody of family members. With pressure mounting, detectives need to move fast to prove their theory, or find a more plausible one.
At that point, we tried to determine any communication Franny may have been having with someone other than her fiancé.
Franny had an ex boyfriend. He no longer lived in the area, but he had returned to the area recently and had some level of connection or interaction with Franny.
The police press Franny's ex. Could he have committed this heinous crime?
That young man was a nice young man, came from a very, very nice family.
And he did have an alibi where he was at the time of the incident. We were able to verify that alibi, so we were able to eliminate him.
If no one in Frances's immediate circle wished her harm, what about her coworkers? Detectives learned that while Frances worked at a retail store, she was involved in a frightening incident.
Where Franny was working, there was a couple shoplifters that had stolen some clothing. She confronted them.
The confrontation turned to violence when the mother of the two young shoplifters jumped in, attacking Frances. The assault left Frances with a severe eye injury, as well as emotional scars.
The incident at work left Frances really scared, nervous, cautious.
The mother of the shoplifters was actually criminally charged for a crime for the assault, some type of unarmed robbery. She was convicted.
So there was some concern that maybe this was a retaliation for that situation.
We did surprise them with a visit. They did have alibis on where they would have been at that time that the incident occurred.
Investigators are able to verify those alibis, eliminating the women as suspects. Frustrated detectives are still hoping that DNA from the crime scene will help them find the killer. But while they wait for results from the crime lab, the people of Jackson attend Franny's funeral, their emotions raw from the news of her violent death.
Her mail carrier showed up to her funeral because she left such an impact on that person. That's how loved and how missed Frances Craig is.
This was definitely a shock to the community because we don't have that many homicides.
I was scared. I just didn't know what to expect.
I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid to do anything because we still had no answers as to what happened.
The overwhelming feeling was the pressure we were under to get this right.
Determined to find justice for Franny, investigators continued to drill down on Frances's fiance. Hoping for an inside look at Eric Wolf, they bring in one of the couple's former roommates.
Ryan Marshall was friends with Eric Wolf. So Eric and Franny welcomed Ryan into their home to stay with them.
His house had caught on fire, and she was trying to help a friend out.
He lived with them until April of 2014. The homicide happened August of 2014, so he had a pretty good knowledge of the two of them. He said everything was good, and he actually vouched for Eric, saying Eric was a really good guy and a friend for a long time, and doesn't feel that Eric would ever do anything to harm Franny.
Speaking with Ryan doesn't give police new reasons to suspect Eric, but it doesn't clear him either.
3 months in, we've pretty much eliminated everybody of interest, anyone close to Franny other than Eric. But we don't have enough evidence to present to the prosecutor.
But then, a new piece of information arrives that brings a new suspect into the spotlight.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
Three months after Frances Craig's murder, the lab results from the crime scene finally arrive, and they provide a huge break in the case.
were notified through a national index. The DNA located on the zip ties matched DNA in a database.
When somebody commits a felony, they have to submit to a DNA test. Somebody's DNA showed up on the zip ties that were used in the homicide. We get a name of Cortez Butler.
Who is Cortez Butler? Police waste no time looking into his criminal record.
We find out Cortez Butler served approximately 25 years for murder and was currently on parole in the Detroit area.
But we knew almost nothing else. We tried to determine if we could connect Cortez Butler to Franny Craig, to Eric Wolf, and we came up with nothing. We tried to determine if he had family locally, and we came up with nothing.
In fact, Cortez Butler appears to have no connection to Jackson whatsoever.
So we looked in our database to see if we have any Cortez Butlers in any police report we've done, any place in Jackson County, and we find none.
Then it was this mad scramble of, well, then how do we even tie Cortez Butler to this? For all we know, he may have worked at Home Depot, and his DNA may be on these zip ties for a completely innocent reason.
The investigators connected with Cortez's parole officer. They got Cortez's phone number. A search warrant was prepared and signed for Cortez Butler's phone records. We learned that Cortez Butler's phone was in Jackson on the early morning hours of August 10th, the actual time of the murder. The rest of those phone records almost exclusively placed it in and around the greater Detroit area, never in Jackson.
But what reason would Butler have to harm Franny?
Eric remained the prime suspect. He was the only dude with a motive.
Maybe Eric was not ready to get married and didn't know how to end a relationship.
So then the thought process was, did Eric hire this person to kill Franny?
The cell phone records also connect Butler to some other shady characters.
We were able to identify a Clifford and Rodney McKee as being connected to Cortez Butler. Clifford McKee lived in the Detroit area. Clifford McKee was in prison for approximately 20 years for murder. We found out that Rodney McKee, he was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. We found out that he had committed an arson.
The arson that Rodney McKee perpetrated was against Donna and Ryan Marshall.
The police are stunned. Ryan Marshall is Eric Wolf's friend, the one who had been welcomed into Franny and Eric's home after his house burned down. But what kind of a connection could Ryan possibly have to a drug dealer like Rodney McKee?
Ryan Marshall's mother had been a heroin dealer for Rodney McKee.
But after months of dealing for Rodney, Ryan's mother decided she wanted out.
Donna Marshall refused to sell heroin for Rodney McKee.
Rodney didn't like to be told no.
Ryan's mother, Donna, held her ground, but Rodney retaliated.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it.
Ryan witnessed it all. He then contacted the police.
What was the connection between Eric Wolf, Cortez Butler, the Marshalls, and a drug dealer from Detroit? Detectives knew there was only one person who could answer the question, and soon they'd have a chance to ask him face to face.
Cortez Butler was arrested for yet another murder. Not Franny's murder, but another murder in the greater Detroit area.
We went down there in Detroit with one sole purpose: to gather information from Cortez Butler on what happened to Franny, and hopefully be able to explain to us what Eric's role in this whole thing was. But Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal.
It was clear that whatever Cortez was going to say, it was not going to be, quote unquote, on the record.
Investigators have DNA evidence and phone records that link convicted killer Cortez Butler to Francis Craig's murder. They arrange to talk to him while he's detained for an unrelated homicide. But he immediately tries to shut them down.
Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal. I said, no one is giving you any kind of a deal without anyone knowing what you have to say.
Detectives press Butler hard until he finally agrees to talk. But only on one condition.
Cortez very pointedly and specifically asked repeatedly to not have the interview recorded.
If detectives agree not to record the interview, there's a chance Butler's testimony won't stand up in court. Still, with no other leads in the case, they decide to roll the dice.
We were there interviewing Cortez in the first place because we need to find out Eric Wolf's involvement in this. And it was dire that we did so as the children were about to go back with Eric Wolf. The whole idea for that was to keep these kids safe.
So the detectives tried to read him his rights. He didn't even want to be bothered with the rights. I know my rights. I think it was, bro, I know my rights, bro.
Butler wastes no time getting right to the point.
Cortez looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong." And I said, "Have what all wrong?" And he, at that time, let us know that Eric had absolutely nothing to do with this murder.
He goes, "I don't know this dude you're talking about, know nothing about him. Just trust me, he was not involved in this whatsoever."
The statement contradicts one of the investigators' strongest leads, but the next thing Butler says is even more explosive.
Cortez identifies himself as the killer. I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now, because I was almost in disbelief.
If Eric wasn't involved, why had this cold-blooded criminal murdered a woman to whom he had no obvious connection? It all went back to Rodney McKee's arson case.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it. Ryan Marshall was a key witness in his arson case.
He made some threats to Ryan that either he not agree to testify or he was going to be killed.
Cortez told us that he had been hired by Rodney McKee to kill Ryan Marshall.
First, Butler had to find Ryan, who was homeless because of the fire.
So we found out from Cortez Butler that they had bad information. They had information that Ryan Marshall was living with Francis Craig and Eric Wolf.
Cortez Butler entered Francis and Eric's house to kill someone who was no longer there.
Franny wasn't even the intended target. Franny was as innocent of a victim as anybody could ever be. When he opened the door, he had made the decision that he was killing somebody while he was there.
He doesn't have to force entry. He gets into the house. He noticed the bedrooms have some kids in it. He walks past them, and he goes to Franny Craig's room. When he gets to Franny Craig's room, he asks her where Ryan is. She said he's not there. Cortez tells Franny not to look at him. In his words, he stated she looked at him, so he had to kill her.
The horrific details that Cortez reveals next leave detectives with no doubt about the guilt of the man sitting across from them.
He decided to bind her, trying to get information from her, but she would not cooperate.
Cortez stabbed her multiple times.
We will never know how long he took to torture her and butcher her. And it clearly took time and effort to stab and slice her in the manner that he did. She died in the service of keeping Ryan's identity and his location secret, and/or she, quite frankly, just didn't know.
Cortez Butler's chilling confession is nothing short of a game changer, both for detectives and for Eric Wolf.
It eliminated our hypothesis that Eric Wolf was responsible for Franny's death.
Eric wasn't involved. He's an odd duck kind of guy.
Eric was able to regain custody of his daughter.
I took from this case that we can never jump to conclusions. I was pretty convinced that he did it, not to the point that I could charge him, but I was pretty convinced I had the right person.
Now that investigators do have the right person, they're determined to put Cortez Butler away for life. But all of that is in jeopardy.
I didn't believe that Cortez's confession would be legally admissible in court because it wasn't recorded. And if Cortez Butler ever walked free again, I don't know that any of us are safe.
After months of dead ends, investigators finally have a confession from Francis Craig's killer. But prosecutors are concerned that his testimony may not hold up in court.
I was concerned that it would be legally inadmissible because it wasn't recorded. He was basically told, we're not planning to use this in court against you. I was concerned that he had not been properly advised of his Miranda rights. But we still had his DNA on the zip ties and the cell phone records. So I kept thinking, and I finally got myself legally to a point where I was convinced that we need to give this a shot.
In October of 2015, Cortez Butler is charged with Francis's murder. When the trial begins 6 months later, Butler appears relaxed, almost giddy.
Cortez really seemed to thrive in that trial atmosphere. He would seek out cameras and smile at them, give them this big, full teeth smile.
He wanted to fight just because he could. He wanted to run the show just because he could.
But that's just a warm-up for the verbal assault he launches into when he takes the stand.
Cortez Butler was a monster at that trial. He bragged on how many bodies he had. It was unbearable.
Butler gleefully describes his murderous past in gory detail. But when asked about killing Francis, he fiercely denies it.
He clearly was so excited to say why he didn't commit this murder because he pleads to all of his murders, and he clearly didn't commit this one because he didn't plead to it.
Butler also denies ever confessing to police. But in a victory for prosecutors, the judge allows detectives to testify about Butler's confession.
We're able to get past that piece because he wasn't in custody for our case. He wasn't actually entitled to his Miranda warnings.
Eyewitness accounts play a major role in trying to move the jury, beginning with Eric's daughter, who found Franny dead.
Alexis was our first witness up there, and I don't know that I will ever forget the audible gasps and sobs and emotion pouring from the jury just from that first witness.
The physical evidence is laid out.
We have Cortez Butler's DNA on the zip ties that were used in the homicide, and we also have phone tracking information showing Cortez Butler and Jackson.
Prosecutors make a compelling case, but without a recording of Butler's confession. It's the detective's word against Butler's. When the jury returns with the verdict, there's no guarantee which way the cards will fall.
Cortez Butler was convicted of first-degree murder, and he won't ever walk free again.
The sentence was life without the possibility of parole for the premeditation murder of Franny Craig.
This was a complicated story to tell to a jury. It is a difficult one for all of us to wrap our brains around, even still.
Cortez goes to look for Ryan at her house, and he doesn't find him, and murders Franny in her own bed while she's doing nothing wrong.
Franny had no connection to her killer whatsoever. We can rest maybe a little easier that the bad guys won't ever hurt anybody else, at least not outside of the walls of prison. But none of it brings Franny back.
Today, Francis's two daughters live with their father. Those closest to Francis do everything they can to hold on to her memory.
Franny's family, I know, they've been lost ever since. I've been lost ever since Francis has been murdered.
I want people to remember how happy of a person she was, how generous, how nice and kind she was.
I miss Francis so much, and there's not a day that goes by that I do not think about her. I know that she's watching over everybody and making sure that everybody's good, because that's the type of person she was.
I wish I had known her, and I hope I honored her in my handling of this case.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to Oxygen.com. A selfless and caring mother of three.
She always thought about other people. She was just a bright light shining.
Viciously murdered in her own home.
Her bedroom was incredibly blood-soaked, unlike I'd ever seen before. There was anger involved in this crime.
I remember just screaming.
Investigators are sent down a rabbit hole of suspects.
She didn't like him, she didn't trust him.
It raised a red flag that there might be some sort of affair going on.
She was jealous of her life, of what she had.
There was clearly bad blood between them.
Every lead appears to turn into a dead end.
It just stalled.
That was disheartening.
Until a surprising witness comes forward.
It was unbelievable.
It was the break we were looking for.
Exposing a killer no one saw coming.
I was pretty shocked.
I just remember being sick to my stomach.
Cortland Township lies in the heart of Michigan.
It's fairly rural, nice, pleasant, kind of a good hometown feel. It's one of those areas that everybody gets along, and when you're driving by their house, they're waving at you, and it's just peaceful and quiet.
This quaint community is stunned on Saturday, August 5th, 2006, when the Kent County Sheriff's Office receives a 911 call.
Emergency.
My daughter, we just found her in bed, and she's got a lash on her arm, and she's all bloody.
Just before 5 o'clock, we received a call of a potential suicide at the Pagel residence.
Officers are immediately dispatched to the home of 41-year-old Renee Pagel.
We were met by Renee's stepmother and her father. They were both just in shock. Renee's father indicated that his daughter was in her bedroom. When I first walked into the bedroom, I observed Renee laying on the bed. I could just remember seeing all the blood-soaked sheets, her shirt. There's blood on her face. It was obvious that Renee Pagel was deceased, and it wasn't a suicide. This was a homicide.
Officers secure the scene as homicide detectives arrive to investigate.
Her bedroom was incredibly blood-soaked, unlike I'd ever seen before. The bed was covered with blood. There was blood spatter on the walls, on the ceiling.
She was stabbed multiple times. I was pretty shocked by the amount of wounds that she had. When I looked at her hand, I saw a large laceration almost in the middle of her hand to be, in my opinion, a defensive wound. Renee was in the fight for her life. Unfortunately, she had lost.
For detectives, the viciousness of the attack is a clue itself.
It appears to us it's a crime of passion. Somebody has something against this victim, so much so that they want to brutalize this person as much as they possibly could.
This was personal.
Somebody went into that residence to murder Renee.
Who in Renee's life would want to attack her and could be capable of such violence? Born in 1965, Renee's spirit was always full of joy.
Renee was the most generous person I have ever known. She loved life. She was always smiling.
Renee Pagel devoted her life to helping others.
She was a nurse practitioner. She had done medical mission trips around the world, and then she also worked at a homeless clinic here in town. She always thought about other people.
Renee's greatest joy was being a mother of 3.
She loved her kids so much. She was a great mom.
Recently separated from Michael, her husband of 10 years, Renee shared custody of her children while always remaining a devoted mother.
The last couple years, because she wanted to be home with her kids and wanted to have some more normal hours, she chose to teach at a technical center.
Even as a teacher, Renee found new ways to help people.
One of her students had come into class one day and was really down, and Renee said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Well, my dad is dying. He needs a kidney." And so Renee agreed to give her kidney to this man who she had never met. She was just so selfless. And it manifested itself in so many ways.
Renee had undergone the kidney transplant surgery just 5 days before her stunning death.
So she was already in a weakened state when she was attacked.
Could the killer have timed the attack knowing that Renee would be recuperating? Detectives look closer at her injuries, hoping they'll reveal telling details about the murder weapon.
It seemed to be a very strong and well-made knife, and large. Just the amount of damage it did to the victim's body, it was at least an inch and a half blade that was wide.
There's no sign of the knife, but forensic technicians searched the bedroom for other evidence.
There was large amounts of blood that our scientific support unit had to collect, and they collected trace evidence like hairs and fibers for testing.
Detectives continue to search the rest of the home.
What struck me about this case that was kind of odd, there was no other areas in the house that were disturbed, that were bloody or anything tracked to the home. It seemed to be very honed in on just her bedroom.
It really kind of puzzled us as investigators. It was the most bizarre scene I've ever been on. This person, in my opinion, had to know that they had to cover their tracks, and I think it was planned, and they thought this out ahead of time.
As forensics continue their work, detectives speak with Renee's parents.
Her father, obviously, he was extremely upset. What he had just found out, his daughter brutally murdered.
Detectives ask her father to help them put together a picture of Renee's last known movements.
He last saw her the night before, around 4 or 5 in the evening, when he was picking up the children and bringing them to their father's house, who lived approximately 15 to 20 minutes away from Renee.
With Renee's children safe with their father at the time of the murder, she was home alone.
He told us he spoke with her on the phone around 8 or 9 in the evening, just checked in on her because obviously he had a lot of concern of her health.
Based on the state of the body, detectives believe Renee was murdered sometime between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. They ask her parents who Renee might have seen last.
Her father talked to me about a tenant, Mike Decker, who was an acquaintance of Renee that has been living on the property for approximately 1.5 years, 2 years. Also, he did speak about a contentious divorce with her husband, Michael, that she was going through. Mike wanted full custody. Mike wanted the home. Mike wanted to not work and have Renee work and be the provider. So that obviously piqued my interest.
Could either of these men have possibly wanted Renee dead? Detectives know they have to hit the ground running right away.
We have to find out who all these people are and go and start to question them to try to find out where they were on the night of the murder.
Coming up, investigators uncover an ominous obsession.
There was a lot of writings about his hatred for Renee.
Alarming secrets.
The ceiling had a hidden compartment.
Renee told me how betrayed she felt.
She was extremely upset. She was very hurt by this.
And the truth blindsides everyone.
We've never had a break like this.
It was, you're not gonna believe this. Just disbelief.
I'm still reeling from that one.
Detectives in a small Michigan town are investigating the vicious murder of 41-year-old mother of 3, Renee Pagel. Police are looking into 2 possible suspects, her tenant and her estranged husband. They first turn their attention to Renee's ex, Michael Pagel.
In the beginning, they seemed like your average all-American couple.
She did tell me that she did love him. She wanted marriage and a family, and he was the opportunity.
She looked at him, I think the words were the knight in shining armor. And speaking to friends of the family, they described Michael as a fantastic dad, that he was always about his children. Nobody said anything bad about him.
Married life seemed like a dream come true. until cracks started to appear.
When I interviewed numerous people, I was told that Mike didn't want a full-time job. Mike wanted to be at home with the kids and let Renee do everything and support him. They were just having a lot of issues back and forth with one another. In early 2005, Mike abruptly surprised Renee with divorce papers.
She was very shocked and just sickened to the core.
There had been some turmoil in the past between them, but in her mind, things were actually getting better. They were kind of turning around, so she was blindsided by it.
She said to me, he expected, I mean expected, the house, the kids, and $2,000 a month.
In June 2006, just 7 weeks before she was murdered, Renee and Michael had their day in divorce court.
When the judge ruled in her favor and said that she got the kids, she got the house, and he was going to have to get a better paying job, something flipped in him.
Was Michael so angered by the ruling that he killed Renee in a furious rage?
There were a lot of things that put him at the top of our list as a potential suspect that had killed Renee.
Detectives go to question Michael.
When we arrived at Mike's house, he was not there. His mother said that he should be back shortly. And I said, just want to get an idea of what were you guys doing last night? And she said, well, Mike had the kids. They were having a fortnight in the living room where Mike had set up some pillows and some blankets. Then she stated about 8 in the morning, she and Michael had a brief conversation, and then they went about their day. So basically, she was giving him an alibi that he was home all night with the kids.
As police finish the interview with his mother, Michael arrives.
I explained to him that something had happened to Renee, and we would like to speak to you about this. When Michael was told that she had passed away, there was no reaction out of him. And immediately, without me even going any further, Michael reached into his wallet and gave me an attorney card and said, yeah, I've been told not to talk to the police. Here's my attorney. So I thought that was extremely odd that Michael didn't want to dig further into what happened to Renee.
After consulting with his divorce attorney, he told investigators he wouldn't answer any questions.
Michael's reticence to cooperate is a red flag. And on August 6th, the day after Renee's murder, police arrive at his home with a search warrant.
We were looking for any type of knife that may have been used during the murder. We took a lot of knives from the house, but we found no knives that matched the length and the size and the different characteristics of the knife that was used.
Police also collect hair samples and fingerprints from Michael.
We wanted to get photos of his body to make sure that there was no cuts or anything on him. We wanted to look at clothing to see if there was any blood trace evidence anywhere.
All the forensic evidence that we collected, we never found anything that was useful in our investigation.
All the knives in his home were examined, and there was nothing to link them to this crime.
We had no murder weapon. We had no real evidence. There was nothing. It was clean.
So when we left that search warrant, I would say we really came out empty-handed. We didn't have anything to tie this murder to Mike Pagel.
Despite his potential motive, Michael Pagel drops off detectives' list of suspects, while news of Renee's violent death quickly spreads across town.
Her friend called me and said, Chris, Renee's dead. It was surreal. I remember curling up in a fetal position and just screaming. I screamed. I was angry.
As her friends and loved ones struggle with her death, Renee's autopsy report comes in.
Cause of death was blunt force trauma, homicide. It was a large, heavy-duty knife that was used on her.
The autopsy revealed upwards of 50 stab wounds. There were numerous lacerations to the hands and the feet, suggesting defensive wounds.
She was stabbed over 50 times. I'm still reeling from that one. It was so brutal.
Detectives continue their investigation and now focus their attention on Renee's tenant, Mike Decker.
She had this barn that had an upstairs apartment, and he was a renter.
The barn was about 75 yards away from the main home. He could have been involved, he could have been a witness, he could have overheard something. One of her friends believed that the week of her surgery, Renee was going to have pizza with Mike Decker, and that she felt that there was some type of maybe a relationship going on. So that sparked our interest. I mean, if he's having a relationship with Renee, did something happen to cause him to get upset and potentially do this horrific crime? We had to find him immediately.
Two days into the investigation of Renee Pagel's murder, detectives have a possible suspect. Her tenant, Mike Decker, who's rumored to be romantically involved with Renee. Detectives interview Mike at his apartment on Renee's property.
At first, I kind of thought loner, 30-year-old gentleman, unemployed, living above a barn. I thought that was kind of odd. When we were speaking to Mr. Decker, we asked him if he was having a relationship with Renee, romantic or whatnot.
Mike said that the relationship is more of a friendship or a kindness thing, no romantic involvement.
He denied having any dinner with Renee over the past week. He stated that it was actually a month or two before he suggested that they go out for pizza just as friends, but Renee had turned that down because she was busy.
Police ask Mike Decker where he was on the night of the murder.
He stated that he went into a local city to eat by himself, drove back probably between 8 or 9. When he arrived at home, he watches a little bit of TV and then goes to bed between 1 and 2 in the morning.
Detectives ask him if he heard anything that night, especially after what they had found at the crime scene.
We did locate a tire track and a footwear impression in Renee's driveway.
He denied hearing anything from Renee's house.
Mike tells police he didn't notice anything unusual the next morning either.
He woke up in the morning around 9 or 10 and then went to meet with his family to go see a bike race. Part of the problem with Mike Decker's alibi, even though he was cooperative through this process, he was on the property when this murder happened.
With no one to corroborate his alibi, police get a warrant to search Mike's apartment.
We seized his pipe from his sink because we wanted to see if there was any blood or trace evidence in there, and then we found a couple of large knives.
The evidence is rushed to the crime lab for analysis.
The knives and the pipe forensically did not show anything. There were no signs of blood.
We found no knives that matched the type of knife that was used.
But still, Mike cannot be ruled out. A week after the homicide, detectives interview him again, this time at the sheriff's office.
He showed no issues of concern of us looking at him as a potential suspect from gathering any type of physical evidence from him. We even offered him a polygraph, and Mr. Decker submitted to that also and passed without any deceit.
With nothing tying Mike Decker to the crime, investigators let him go. Searching for any further clues about Renee, detectives reach out to her parents once again, and in turn, get a lead on a new suspect, Renee's own sister, Michelle.
Renee's father stated that the relationship between Renee and Michelle was strained. He mentioned that Michelle was jealous of Renee's life, of what she had.
She wanted a successful career, a family, a home, all of those things.
Renee and Michelle's problems went beyond sibling rivalry.
During the divorce, Renee's attorney was able to subpoena the phone records of Michael Pagel. So he turned those over to Renee.
When she examined phone records, she learned that Mike and Michelle were talking frequently.
So she was extremely upset. She was very hurt by this.
There was such significant communication between Mike Pagel and the sister Michelle that it raised a red flag to us right away that there might be some sort of affair going on.
Renee told me how betrayed she felt by her sister. She really struggled with that.
During the interviews with numerous people, it was mentioned that Michelle potentially was having a relationship with Michael. Once I learned that, it's obviously somebody we wanted to look at.
Michelle is brought in for an interview. And though she says that she is saddened by her sister's death, her answers raise eyebrows with investigators.
She didn't speak very highly of Renee. She was not happy at all the way that Renee was handling the divorce.
Michelle clearly took Mike's side in it and kind of put her sister in the bad light. She felt that Mike was a good father, and it was her sister that was really trying to take advantage of him.
We did ask her if she was in a relationship or had a relationship with Michael, and she completely denied it.
Detectives asked Michelle where she was the night of the murder.
She said she was working into the evening, and that evening she was home with her roommate. Basically, she was stating that she was home the evening of the murder.
Michelle did take a polygraph, and she was found to be truthful and did not appear to have any involvement in the homicide.
With Michelle all but ruled out, investigators discover that she isn't the only family member Renee had issues with.
When I spoke with Renee's parents, it was mentioned that Michael, her soon-to-be ex-husband, had a brother. The brother was Charles Pagel. They called him Bo. And they said that he was very strange, very odd.
He and Renee did not get along. Renee didn't like him. She didn't trust him.
When detectives dig deeper, they uncover something troubling.
We learned from a close friend of Renee that he had been married numerous times, and she believed that maybe Bo had murdered his last wife.
Was Bo a killer? And had he now killed again?
That obviously raised some red flags for us as investigators, and that's somebody we wanted to speak with very quickly.
Detectives investigating the vicious stabbing of Renee Pagel are looking at her estranged husband's brother, Bo Pagel.
Bo was married 3 times in the past, and one of his ex-wives died under suspicious circumstances.
One of Renee's friends gives a statement to police, claiming that she believed Bo may have killed his ex-wife.
Obviously, what really sent us his way was the potential murder of his last wife, so that had our attention.
Detectives must determine if Bo could actually be a killer. They look deeper into his background.
Bo was a loner, lived at home with his mom. We learned that he was on-the-road trucker, and he traveled all over the country. He would be gone days at a time.
Investigators also look closer at Bo and Renee's fractured relationship.
There was clearly bad blood between him and Renee, dating back years, going back to the wedding.
We found out that Bo refused to be in the wedding. He was going to be the best man. He did not like her, thought she was not good for Mike, and he didn't approve of it whatsoever. He was outspoken to Michael about even marrying Renee.
And I think the relationship between Bo and Mike was really more of an estranged relationship for the 10 years that Mike and Renee were married.
But after Renee and Michael's separation, everything changed.
I do know that once Mike filed for divorce, he and Bo rekindled that relationship and became pretty close.
Bo was, I believe, happy that Renee was now out of the picture and he could have his brother back.
Could Bo have wanted Renee permanently out of Michael's life? Detectives bring him in for questioning.
So we interviewed Bo, and he denied any knowledge of the murder, denied any involvement.
Bo had said that through the week he was on the road trucking. He got home Thursday night.
Bo's alibi was that he was essentially across the state. He had driven a route the day of the homicide. He had gotten back around 6 o'clock and had gone out with some friends for dinner.
And then afterwards, he stated he went home, spoke to his daughter, and then went to bed.
And then the next morning got up and went canoeing with his daughter.
We contacted his work. We spoke to the family that he actually had dinner with that Friday evening to account for they were with him, what restaurant, until what time.
It pretty much matched up.
Though most of his story checks out, no one can confirm that Bo was at home at the time of Renee's murder. Needing more information, detectives reach out to Bo's daughter.
We confirmed with her that they went on the canoe trip in the morning.
Bo's daughter also puts to rest any suspicion that Bo was responsible for her mother's death.
She gave us details about her mother that we didn't know. She was a diabetic, she had some blood sugar problems, and she really didn't care for going to the doctor. So she didn't seek the medical help that she needed, and that ultimately is what resulted in her death.
She did not suspect Bo of doing anything.
Though Bo's alibi isn't ironclad, there is nothing concrete to link him to Renee's murder, and he is released. It's been 6 weeks since the homicide, and the investigation has ground to a halt.
The reason that we were stuck is because there was no physical evidence that would help tie any one person to this crime. We looked at every person. The estranged husband, his brother Bo, Renee's sister, and Renee's tenant. And there was nothing to link them to this crime.
Police continue investigating for many months, but with no fresh leads, the case goes cold.
It just stalled. There was a point where I felt that we would never have a conclusion in this case.
It was just sad that we couldn't bring closure to Renee and to her family.
As the months went by, I was just like, what is going on?
Once the months turns into years, that was disheartening.
For 13 years, there are no new developments in the case. But through it all, Renee's best friend never gives up hope.
We created a website in the year 2007, and it was a really therapeutic way for people to come and grieve and share stories. And that website was very effective in getting the word out about Renee's murder, doing whatever it took to find justice for Renee.
In a stunning turn of events,
which was a complete shock to Bo. And it immediately made Bo angry. He said, I believed you for all these years, we've supported you, and come to find out you're the one responsible. I can't believe you would have done that. And I think this made Mike angry. He expected Bo to congratulate him. So the way Bo described it was out of frustration. Mike took the knife and threw it into the river. Bo described it as about a 12-inch long, bigger knife, and it appeared to be a very strong, sturdy knife.
Investigators get Bo to show them exactly where Michael had thrown the knife.
There was quite a bit of old metal, various pieces of cars and other things inside the river, and in my opinion, that wasn't a safe diving environment. We had to find another means to search the bottom of the river.
Police wonder if they will be able to recover a knife that has been in the water for 9 years. Then, one of the detectives comes up with an idea.
It's called a rare earth magnet. The magnet is something that I've had at home, and it just came to mind as an option for a way to search the watery area and to grab whatever metal pieces were on the bottom of the river.
It was tremendously impressive for him to come up with his own homemade magnet device. And, you know, he concocted his own fishing line and pulling it through the stream, which is remarkable.
Police spend 3 days painstakingly dragging the riverbed with no success.
So we were on our last few passes of the river, and I began pulling toward my side, and then it was, you're not gonna believe this, just disbelief. The knife was stuck to the magnet, and it was exactly as Bo described.
It was late in the day, I want to say 3 or 4 o'clock, and got the phone call. He got the knife. I'm like, no, are you kidding me? He got the knife, no.
And this is the magnet and the knife exactly as we found it.
It was awesome. It was everything you could hope for when you're investigating a case, to get that piece of evidence that you know you need, that you really weren't sure if it was going to be there, but there it is.
Police now need to confirm if the knife found matches the knife used in Renee Pagel's murder.
We brought it down to the medical examiner's office. They viewed it and instantly said, absolutely. It's consistent with the injuries that are on Renee's body. We were very confident we had the murder weapon.
Unbelievable. We've never had a break like this. We got the needle in the haystack by finding the knife, and now we had a murder weapon that backed up what a witness said.
It allowed us to validate Bo's statement that that knife was thrown in that water by Mike Pagel.
On February 6th, 2020, 13 years after Renee's death, Michael Pagel is officially charged with her murder.
So this case was going to hinge a lot on the testimony of Bo, but it's still circumstantial evidence. And is the jury going to believe him or not?
In the midst of that, the defense attorneys asked if we would consider a plea offer. When someone asks for a plea, it usually means that they're willing to tell the truth. And in this case, that was one of the conditions, is we wanted to hear the truth as part of the plea agreement.
The prosecution agrees to a plea deal of second-degree murder and a minimum of 25 years in prison.
We wanted to get a term of years to make sure he was old enough that he would never harm anyone again.
On May 20th, 2020, 55-year-old Michael Pagel agrees to plead guilty to second-degree murder, avoiding a trial by jury. But at his plea hearing, Michael suddenly turns the case on its head.
It was unbelievable. And I just remember being sick to my stomach.
After 13 years of investigating the heinous murder of Renee Pagel, her estranged husband is finally being charged for the brutal crime. But at his plea hearing, Michael makes an admission that takes everyone by surprise.
I hired my brother, Charles Pagel, to kill Renee Pagel. Charles Pagel murdered Renee Pagel.
We were all absolutely shocked when he said that his brother did this.
Mike maintained the fact that Bo was the one responsible. He admitted that he had orchestrated it and that he had planned it, but insisted that Bo was the one that actually did the stabbing, which was a complete shock to us. We had investigated and we found no evidence, nothing to directly tie Bo Pagel to this murder.
Had Bo been hiding his involvement all along? While detectives take another look at him, they also dig for more evidence against Michael. And after several searches of his home, they make a surprising discovery.
At Mike's house, we found the ceiling had a hidden compartment. When we took this down, we found 3 hard drives in this hidden compartment.
Investigators spend time decoding the contents of Michael's hard drives, and what they find is chilling.
In those hard drives, there was journaling.
I would call it strange. It appeared to be written by almost two different personalities, one that would talk back and forth to the other.
Talked about planning to divorce, how much he hated her.
There was a lot of writings about his dislike and his hatred for Renee.
Then, weeks later, police tracked down a crucial witness.
We uncovered a friend who had said that he had gifted a knife to Michael that was substantially similar to the one that was actually found.
And he admitted that he gave it to Mike as a gift, and it was delivered directly to Mike Pagel. So that helped us put the knife in Mike's hands.
So now you have a knife that was found in the river that now a friend is saying had given to Michael and not to Bo.
While the evidence is circumstantial, police believe it strengthens their case even further against Michael.
There was nothing that could back up Michael's story in terms of physical evidence, any other witnesses, anything else other than his word about it. Whereas Bo at least had stuff to back it up. His alibi backed up, and the physical evidence that he provided backed it up. So there's just absolutely nothing that shows that Bo did this. This was Michael Pagel. This was all him that committed this murder that night.
Investigators conclude what likely happened on the night of Renee's murder.
When the children were sleeping, he snuck out of his house and he went over to Renee's.
It's pretty well known that she donated a kidney.
Obviously, she wasn't strong at this point.
She was asleep in bed, and he walked in with that knife and brutally stabbed her.
I believe that Mike no doubt planned this out.
There's no way you leave a crime scene that clean and it's not carefully planned. How he absolutely didn't leave a blood drop, a fingerprint, a mark, any physical evidence.
Bo tells us about Mike commenting that he had worn coveralls and galoshes. So he had taken precaution to not get his clothes bloody, and that he had removed those items and then put them in a garbage bag and left. And that the clothes were later burned.
He's not a stupid man. He knew enough to cover his tracks. He went in there purposely. He had an intent, he had a purpose, and he went in there to kill her, and he did.
There was anger involved in this crime. This was evil.
But why would Michael kill Renee?
I believe Mike Pagel was very upset with the way the divorce was proceeding, that he didn't get sole custody of the children, that he didn't get the family home. Things just weren't going his way.
He's got motive, and if anybody's got rage, it's the about-to-be ex-husband who's not getting what he wanted.
I think that the writing was on the wall for him that this was the end.
On October 5th, 2020, Michael Pagel is sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison.
I never thought it would take 14 years to bring justice to Renee and to her family. But, you know, you always had in the back of your mind that justice would be served.
It was incredible exhilaration, and I do believe that the information that I provided and the passion that I poured into this did help.
Renee's loved ones will always be inspired by her memory.
The friendship that we had was deep. It was eternal. She brought so much beauty to this world. She was just a bright light shining. Oh, I miss her.
Beloved taxi driver.
Raphael was a hardworking guy. He always tried to do better and better and better.
Is murdered in cold blood.
That's when they observed a body inside of the trunk.
There were 9 gunshots. That's not an accident.
We had no leads, we had no suspects, had no idea who could have done this to him.
Police uncover a sinister trail of motives.
A lot of people was jealous of Raphael.
Raphael tended to like the ladies a little bit.
Raphael had approximately $2,000 in his vehicle.
But struggled to find suspects.
People were asking, do we have to be scared? Is there a murder out there killing us Hispanics?
We noticed on his license plate of his vehicle, there appeared to be a blood stain.
Until the bizarre truth turns the case on its head.
We're calling him through the loudspeaker, trying to get him to come out of the house, which turned into an hours-long standoff.
When that fingerprint came back with a second person, it really blew it wide open.
We knew he was at the scene.
That was a bombshell. That was a game changer in terms of the criminal prosecution. Ultimately, to come back to these 2 people was something that we never saw coming.
Rogers County, Oklahoma, a quiet rural district north of Tulsa's city limits.
Rogers County is just a great, tight-knit community.
It's an agricultural community, a very wholesome, family-oriented community.
That all changes in the early hours of May 1st, 2015, when a truck driver sees something unusual beneath a bridge.
Our dispatch center received a call of a vehicle partially submerged in the Caney River off Highway 169.
Police and firefighters arrive at the scene in minutes and cordon off the area. Emergency crews check to see if anyone is trapped inside.
The news media was there, and it was being broadcasted over live TV.
As the car is towed onto the riverbank, its trunk pops open.
That's when they initially observed a body inside of the trunk.
At that point, we knew we had a serious crime at hand.
Rogers County Sheriff's detectives arrive and begin their investigation.
When I arrived on scene, I observed a Hispanic male inside of the trunk.
These pockets look like they've been rummaged through.
Only when detectives move the victim's shirt do they realize the violent nature of the attack.
He appeared to have several gunshot wounds to his chest area.
There were 9 gunshots. That's not an accident. 9 gunshots is intentional.
Somebody wanted to make sure that he did not survive his injuries.
The first question facing detectives is who is the man in the trunk?
We did not locate any type of identification or any wallet or anything that a normal person would have in his pockets.
So it made it very hard for us to identify who he was. We were taking photographs of his tattoos and unique markings on his body.
Inside of the vehicle, we found some cell phones.
As the car was submerged, we got lucky that one of the cell phones was placed on the dash and it was fully intact, still operational.
The detectives and forensics team comb the riverbank for further clues.
We noticed a large amount of blood, and we suspected that was the area that the victim was initially shot. Well, near that pool of blood, we also found some shell casings consistent with the size of bullet wounds inside the deceased body.
A few feet away, detectives notice more clues.
There were several beer cans and a cigarette butt and a piece of tissue.
I was told that a family member had showed up and seen his brother's car on the news, and he said, yes, that's my brother's car.
The young man's brother is Rafael Hernandez Torres, a taxi owner serving customers in Tulsa's Hispanic community.
I showed him a photograph of a tattoo that I had taken from the victim's body. That Oscar immediately identified the tattoo belonging to his brother and then began sobbing and crying because at that point we told him that his brother had been murdered.
It broke my heart. When I seen the pictures, it felt like the whole the whole world just kind of ended.
Oscar called me. When I found out Rafael got shot, I didn't even know how to react. I was just shocked. I was like, how?
Rafael Hernandez Torres was born outside Mexico City on October 22nd, 1976.
As a kid, he was a rebel.
Growing up, he was always riding his bike from town to town.
He loved to go and get to know people from other places, get to know other cities. He just loved to travel everywhere.
When Rafael was 20 years old, his parents moved him and his siblings to the U.S. As one of the oldest sons, Rafael helped support the family.
It was difficult to move to a different place that we didn't know, and we had to start from zero.
Rafael was the big brother. And as soon as we got here, Rafael told us to get straight to school, learn the language, and just keep on going. Rafael was a hardworking guy. He always tried to do better and better and better.
As a young man, Rafael's warm personality attracted others.
He was so friendly with everyone, especially ladies.
Rafael was enterprising too, turning his passion for travel into a career.
Rafael started his taxi business with one car. From there, it kept on going and going.
Rafael was known in Tulsa's Hispanic community as someone willing to help anyone in need.
Rafael cared about everybody. If he saw you down, he'll try to help you. If he saw you homeless, he'll get you a room and get you a shower and help you out.
He knew people who didn't have anything to eat, and he helped them out. Rafael had a great heart.
What would lead anyone to take Rafael's life so violently on that riverbank?
Everybody knew him. Everybody liked him. He did a service to his community, always gave back to his community. At this point, we're thinking, why would somebody kill him?
At the crime scene, detectives ask Oscar and Juan what they know about Rafael's last hours before his body was discovered in the river.
Rafael called me and told me that he was going to Texas. But the next day, he didn't call me, which was strange because he was always calling me every time he went out of state.
Police ask if Oscar and Juan know why anyone might want to kill their brother.
We learned that Rafael was known to carry approximately $2,000 on him at all times.
Whoever did this took his ID, took his wallet, took any money he may have had. So that led to the possible motive that Rafael had been killed for the money.
Oscar gives the detectives one more useful piece of information.
Oscar told us that some of Rafael's vehicles had been vandalized where Rafael ran his business.
A lot of people was jealous of Rafael because he was really successful in the business that he was doing.
Had the beloved taxi driver made a lethal enemy in his community?
We had no leads, we had no suspects, had no idea who could have done this to him.
This wasn't just a disagreement or something. It was a very violent act.
I had a lot of questions about Rafael. Why? Who? Why would they kill him? What did he do?
This is not a random killing. This is someone who targeted Rafael and wanted him to die.
Coming up, detectives uncover a tangled web of romantic interests.
Not only does he call her frequently and go by and see her, but I know he bought her flowers.
She had an unusual relationship with her ex-husband. They both still slept in the same bed.
So a scorned husband, that could fit right in with that. Now we're starting to think this could be a motive.
And a surprising lead sends the case in a new direction.
We were shocked when we found a second individual's fingerprint at the scene.
After discovering Rafael Hernandez Torres shot dead and stuffed into the trunk of his own taxicab, detectives are trying to establish if it was a robbery gone wrong or if he'd been targeted by someone with a grudge.
We were trying to see if we could locate who had vandalize Raphael's vehicles, see if there's anyone that had a motive or a reason to harm or murder Raphael.
Detectives are also on the lookout for vehicles spotted near the bridge on the night of the murder.
We established a tip line, and we got that number out to the news outlets.
We received multiple tips from passerbys describing that they saw a truck on the side of the highway, a black SUV on the side of the highway, and then a silver car on the side of the highway.
So we initially started looking for vehicles that could match that description in the hopes that we could run a name.
Next, investigators head to the heart of Tulsa's Latino district, where Raphael based his business.
The area of 21st and Garnett in Tulsa is a predominantly Latino community. Right at the heart of that is Santa Cecilia Plaza.
There's grocery stores, there's hair salons, ice cream parlors, where the Hispanic community gathers with their families.
The Plaza Santa Cecilia, it's a place to go if you're Hispanic most of the time. Something's always happening.
Raphael parked his vehicles outside of the Mercandito and also right next to the ice cream shop.
Raphael spent every day walking around talking to these people.
Raphael gave rides to people that needed them. He helped translate, and he's just well known in his community as a person always giving back and helping. Very kind and loving person.
Raphael always said that's what he loved to do. He loved, helping out people.
Detectives canvass Raphael's friends at the plaza.
They were shocked that he was murdered and killed. And they were heartbroken.
Was there anyone who had a reason to want him dead?
It was well known in that community that Raphael had money, that he carried money with him.
We spoke with Roman, who was considered a maintenance man around the area.
We spoke with Felipe, who owned a grocery store, as well as Adon, who ran the ice cream cart.
Adon came into contact with Raphael multiple times in a week as he pushed that cart up and down those businesses.
We actually learned that people seemed to really like Raphael. No one really seemed to have a motive to want to harm him.
As detectives continue searching the plaza for leads, they gain access to Raphael's cell phone records.
So initially, we had the physical phone. I drafted a search warrant to try to extract as much data as possible from that phone. Raphael was talking to multiple people between 9:15 and 9:30. So we know that he's alive at that point, or he wouldn't be answering his phone. And then after that time period, he doesn't answer any more phone calls.
It's always important when someone has been murdered to find out who they talked to last. One of the numbers that we had identified on Raphael's phone belonged to a female named Letty. Letty worked at a laundromat near where Raphael kept his vehicles. We found out through Oscar that Raphael and Letty may have had some type of relationship. Raphael would frequent Letty's place of business at the laundromat and would go by to see her.
Not only does he call her frequently and go by and see her, but I know he bought her flowers. He took little gifts up to her. He took her to Dallas one time for one of his fairs. They drove to Dallas and then drove right back.
There's one more thing about Letty that gets the officers' attention.
We also discovered that Letty was married.
As officers dig into this new lead, Raphael's autopsy results come in.
Raphael was shot 3 times in the front and 6 times in the back.
There's a mindset behind somebody shooting somebody that many times. It tells you that this is a crime of passion. It's not just something that just happened.
So a scorned husband, that could fit right in with that. Now we're starting to think this could be a motive.
Had Letty's husband killed Raphael in a jealous rage? Detectives decide to get some answers from Letty.
So we went to interview Letty, and Letty was not very forthcoming.
We had talked to her about her relationship with Raphael. What is that? What is that relationship? She told us that they were just friends.
Letty did deny being in a relationship with Raphael.
We learned after speaking with Letty that she had not been truthful to us. She did not provide a correct date of birth, did not provide her correct address.
At the station, detectives searched Letty's name in the police database.
We later learned Letty's true address and her true date of birth. In doing so, we discovered that Letty had an outstanding warrant.
So obviously, we're on high alert with her because she's trying to deceive us.
Knowing that we've been lied to, we want to observe Letty's comings and goings, so we'd start conducting surveillance on Letty's home.
As detectives stake out Letty's home, their attention is drawn to a vehicle.
As we arrived, we saw a vehicle pull in that was almost an exact match to one of them mentioned in the tip line.
He's driving a black truck with a silver stripe on the back of it. And that was a possible vehicle we were looking for.
Detectives investigating the shooting of taxi driver Rafael Hernandez Torres believe his friendship with laundromat worker Letty could have sent her husband into a jealous rage.
First thing we decided to do when looking into Letty and her husband was we went to see who her husband's talking to.
Then a truck pulls up in Letty's driveway that matches a vehicle spotted near the scene of Rafael's murder.
So from there, we decided that we're going to make contact with the individual in the truck.
Officers confront the truck's owner, who claims to be the friend of Letty's husband, Mario.
Rogelio was basically crashing on Mario and Letty's couch, and they were putting him up for several weeks.
While speaking with Rogelio, we noticed on his license plate of his vehicle that there appeared to be a blood stain.
And there's a bloody fingerprint on the tag of the truck. Looking under the truck, and there's a piece of tissue that is kind of consistent with tissue that we found at the scene.
Is this the evidence detectives have been searching for? They search the house and see what else they can find.
During the search of that home, we did find a firearm inside the home. We submitted that to the state crime lab.
We had a victim that had been killed, put into the trunk of his vehicle, and then that vehicle was subsequently pushed into the river. It was a very narrow window of time that all this happened in. So in most of the investigators' mind, it's a very good possibility that there's two people involved in this. Well, we got what we believe could be the possible vehicle. We have evidence that Letty's husband and this friend of his could be our suspects. And we're thinking this is the big crack to the case that we've been looking for.
Police bring Mario and Rogelio in for questioning. They ask Mario about Rafael. Had the taxi driver's advances on Letty made him a target?
Mario was familiar with that Rafael had bought his wife flowers and was known to stop by her place of business frequently, but he did not seem to be very upset by that.
Mario insists that he was never jealous of Rafael because he and Letty are divorced.
We had discovered that Letty had an unusual relationship with her ex-husband. They both still lived in the same house. They lived there with their children. They even slept in the same bed.
She was kind of out seeing people. He didn't care.
Mario also insists that he was at home asleep on the night of the murder. Rogelio gives the same alibi, insisting that he never left the house that night.
Their alibis were not really solid. We were worried about them being co-conspirators, so at the time, we weren't putting just a whole lot of stock into that.
Officers press Rogelio about the blood on his license plate.
But we talked to him about the blood on it, and he's got a good excuse for that. He cut his finger trying to put the tag on, and the bloody fingerprint is his blood. They were more than willing to provide their DNA and fingerprints to clear themselves.
Despite officers' suspicion of Mario and Rogelio, the lab results tell a different story.
We have DNA from the scene, and Rogelio and Mario don't possess that DNA.
The firearm inside the home did not match bullets that we found in Rafael.
And based on their phone numbers, they weren't at the scene. And we found zero evidence linking them to the crime, and that whole theory really started to fall apart quick. We were going back to the drawing board and we were starting over again.
We weren't sure on where to go from here other than talking to the community. It was very frustrating during this point.
With each passing day, pressure to solve the case is only increasing.
People were asking, do we have to be scared? Is there a murder out there killing us Hispanics?
My whole family was worried because they didn't want me doing the taxing business because they didn't want me to be the same as my brother.
At a crossroads in the investigation, police find a new way forward when they gain access to further cell phone records from the night of the murder.
One of the last contacts that Raphael had was a fare that was supposed to be getting a ride to Texas later that night, and Raphael never showed up.
But there's one other number that we know is also communicating with Raphael at around the time of his death.
Raphael was scheduled to pick up an individual and told him that he was going to be late because he had another job.
Raphael had told him that he was going to help a friend who had gotten into an accident, and he was going to go translate for him to the police. We know that phone conversation took place around 9:15, and we believe that around 9:35 that Raphael was murdered.
Had Raphael been lured to his death by a call from someone he knew?
As we start diving into the call detail records on that phone number, we're able to follow the tower information and the location of that phone to the scene of the crime.
We were able to track Raphael's phone and the suspect phone, both going to the same area. However, Raphael's phone didn't leave, and the suspect phone went back to Tulsa.
This was very important to us because we knew that this was the possible killer that enticed Raphael to where he ultimately was shot and killed.
That's when we make the decision to focus everything on that number.
When police try to identify the phone's owner, there's a problem.
We get subscriber information for the phone number, and it comes back to a fictitious name.
The number was on a prepaid phone. It wasn't attached to any particular person.
That number was very important to us, especially after seeing the lengths that the individual went to hide their identity. We felt very strong that this number was going to belong to the killer.
So investigators had to start looking at other ways of identifying who this phone belonged to.
We started to get call detail records for that number.
And they started contacting people that were in contact with the cell phone.
We were able to pinpoint a phone number from someone that talked to the suspect phone several times close to the time of the killing.
The phone number belongs to a man named Marco Lara.
But once we got the name from Marco Lara, we started running a criminal history check, and we find the drug charges, some firearms charges, stuff that we were interested in when you're looking for a violent killer. We knew that Marco knew who possessed our bad guy's phone number because he had been calling it.
Marco ran with some of the same people in that area that Raphael had contact with. And so we really felt like Marco was going to be a good spot to gain some information.
We went to the area of the plaza. Marco lived one street over, and we staked out his house. We saw a truck pull into his driveway, and he gets out of the driver's seat, and he walks into the house. So we get out, and we start covering exits to make sure that he isn't leaving. But that's when things went south.
Two weeks after cab driver Rafael Hernandez Torres is found shot dead in the trunk of his car, police are about to confront Marco Lara, a man they believe may know the identity of the killer.
We went there to make contact with Marco. He refused to come to the door.
We're calling him out through the loudspeaker, trying to get him to come out of the house, which turned into a standoff. We established a phone connection. There was a woman and children in the house, his family, and we're requesting for him to come out. And this goes on for a long time. Eventually, his wife and children come out, and we believe, that it's just him in the home.
There was a several-hour standoff with him in which he ultimately gave up and came outside and surrendered.
Police take Marco into custody and begin their interrogation.
Initially, we were thinking, this is a bad guy. He's got criminal history. He's actively resisting us coming and arresting him. We're thinking, okay, this could very well be an associate of our killer, if not possibly involved.
But cell tower phone records prove otherwise.
But once we got him arrested, we were able to determine that his phone as well had not traveled to the area where Raphael was killed.
If Marco is not involved, then why had he resisted arrest?
He has an outstanding warrant.
He's doing whatever he can to keep from going to jail.
No longer a direct suspect, Marco still has information valuable to the investigation.
So we had seized his phone. We had his phone. I typed in our suspect's number, and he said, that's him.
That number belonged to Roman Medrano, who lived in Tulsa.
Marco provided us the apartment complex that Roman lived at.
So knowing that Roman Medrano was the owner of that phone, we sat at the apartment complex and we figured out what apartment he was in.
And the next morning, we served a search warrant on that apartment.
When detectives search the apartment where Roman Medrano lives with his wife Blanca, they're surprised by what they find.
As we entered the residence, I noticed there was no furniture. It appeared that Roman maybe didn't have a lot of money. Maybe he was struggling to pay his bills.
We find that there's very little in the way of furniture, and it looks like things are being sold off. There's IRS paperwork scattered about.
Searching through Blanca's purse, officers make a discovery that raises their suspicions further.
There was approximately $2,000 in her purse. Raphael had approximately $2,000, in his vehicle. And now our suspect's wife has this large sum of money in her purse that is pretty close to the amount.
We had the one suspect number that we had determined to belong to Roman Medrano. At that point, we felt we had enough to bring Roman and his wife in for questioning.
At the police station, detectives first interview Roman's wife, Blanca.
Blanca initially denied knowing who Raphael was.
Blanca told us that she was not given a ride by Raphael, that Roman has nothing to do with this.
Then how to explain the $2,000 in her purse?
Roman doesn't have any money. He's worried about losing his roof over his head. It's well known in the community that Raphael carries lots of cash with him. So I don't think it was any secret that by killing Raphael that Roman could get a payday out of that. Blanca basically told us that Roman was with her the night of the homicide, that he's always home.
In another interview room, detectives question Roman.
Roman told us that he did not know Raphael, that he didn't know that his wife knew Raphael, that he had never been to the area where the homicide occurred. Roman denied every aspect of any knowledge of the case whatsoever.
Roman just heard of Raphael's taxi service and that he was, doing work in the Hispanic community.
But detectives have information that suggests a closer connection.
Shortly after the first interview with Marco, he reached out to us and gave us more information about Roman. Marco told us that he had overheard Roman and another individual talking about how Raphael had given Roman's wife, Blanca, a ride in this taxi cab to the Tulsa County Jail.
Pressed further, Roman admits to knowing more about Raphael than he first let on.
Raphael had a successful business and tended to like the ladies a little bit.
Roman did not like the fact that she was taking rides with Raphael.
He still wasn't willing to tell us that he was, at the scene of the crime.
Confronted with Roman's admission that she'd taken rides with Raphael, Blanca's story begins to change.
Now she knows Raphael. She's telling us that they had talked, they knew of each other.
Blanca began to tell us that during one of her rides with Raphael, that he came on to her and that she believed that it was inappropriate and told Roman about it.
We had learned that Raphael had made comments to Blanca as trying to hit on her and that this was very upsetting to Roman. Blanca described Roman as a very jealous man.
Had something happened between Raphael and Blanca that triggered Roman to seek revenge?
Based on how many times they were shot, there was a personal element to this. We believe that Raphael's conduct towards Roman's wife could have been a motive to kill him. At this point in the investigation, we definitely feel like we have our guy.
"17 days after Rafael Hernandez Torres' murder, police are investigating husband and wife Roman and Blanca Medrano.
There were two angles that led us to Roman. One was jealousy. We knew that Roman was aware of Raphael giving a ride to Blanca.
Roman believed that Raphael disrespected his wife by coming on to her as she described, which would indicate a motive behind Raphael's killing.
But we also knew that Roman was struggling financially. And we had every reason to believe that Roman would know that Raphael carried money with him.
We definitely feel like we've got probable cause to arrest him. We feel like we have our guy. We don't know if there's another individual at this point, but we know we've got at least one of them.
Under questioning, the couple remains adamant in their denials.
Roman would never come out and tell us the truth.
Roman told us that he had never been to the area where the homicide occurred. Blanca gives us an alibi for Roman and says that he's at the house with her. We knew that wasn't true because it was Roman's cell phone that was at the scene. We got the overlay of suspect location from the cell towers. We knew the possessor of that phone was involved in this killing.
Was it possible that someone else had Roman's phone on the night of the murder?
We had the evidence from the cell phone that Roman talked to Blanca 20 times the night of the homicide. If you're sitting right next to him, why are you calling him that many times? And she says, I'm not. So things started to change. Now we have actual evidence from, the mouth of his own wife that what he's saying isn't true. So to this point, we have a very compelling circumstantial case. We've got the cell phone records. We have motive.
Police take Roman's fingerprints and swab him for DNA.
And then we get the information back from their crime lab, and we find DNA from the scene on a beer bottle that belongs to Roman Medrano.
The DNA evidence that came back to Roman Medrano really firmed up the case against him. It went from a very circumstantial case to a really good case.
Police are ready to charge Roman with murder, but know the case is far from airtight.
There was no murder weapon. We didn't have an eyewitness to it. We knew that proving it in court was going to be very difficult to do.
Then, as detectives go back carefully over forensic reports from the state crime lab, they find something unexpected.
We were shocked when we found a second individual's fingerprint at the scene.
When that fingerprint came back with a second person, it really blew it wide open.
This fingerprint affirmed our suspicion that there was more than one person involved in the killing.
That was a bombshell. That was a game changer in terms of the criminal prosecution, because now we had an eyewitness.
That print came back to a guy by the name of Adon Mora. Adon Mora was a member of the community there in the plaza.
This fingerprint came back from the Department of Homeland Security when Adon Mora was deported previously.
Adon Mora was known as the Ice Cream Man.
When I found out that the Ice Cream Man was involved, it was a shock because you don't expect someone to be that person.
Why would Raphael's friend, the ice cream vendor, turn against him?
We knew he was at the scene. We knew he knew the victim. We knew he knew the other suspect. Marco Lara told us that Adon and Roman were pretty tight. I mean, they spent a lot of time together.
The consensus amongst the investigators is that it was more than likely a two-reason motive. One, they were in dire straits, needing money, and 2, that Raphael had disrespected Roman in talking to his wife, Blanca. At that point, we issued a warrant for Adon Mora. However, we did not have a location as where he was at.
We spoke with an individual that told us that he had gotten scared about a criminal investigation and that he had went up north.
But we did find that he was on Facebook. We wrote a search warrant to Facebook, and Facebook provided us a probable location of Adon.
We were able to locate those IP addresses into a suburb of Detroit, Michigan. It gave us about a 3-block area.
Detectives contact U.S. Marshals, who take Adon into custody within a matter of hours.
I read Adon his rights. While speaking with him, he acted as if he was not close to Raphael in any way. When I asked him specifically if he had been to the area of the Caney River, he stopped the interview and requested that his attorney be present.
Hearing of Adon's arrest, Roman requests another interview with police.
During that interview, Roman was trying to give me scenarios where Adon had perpetrated this crime, and Roman was just trying to give him a ride, had no idea what was going on.
Told that Roman has pinned the blame on him, Adon decides to cooperate and tell his side of the story.
Adon eventually agrees to speak with us and said that Roman had owed him money and that he had a way to get him his money back.
Adon says that the night of the homicide, Roman tells him that he needs Adon to come with him and that he was going to get him the money. So Adon gets in the vehicle with Roman. Roman stops. They get a pack of beer and they drive down to the riverbank of the Caney River.
Had Adon just signed on to help Roman kill Raphael? If so, which one of them fired the gun?
There's a lot of things that we don't know at this point.
We had 2 people that we could put at the crime scene, but we didn't know who the trigger man was.
We felt confident that we could prove that Roman Medrano was there and was a part of the crime, but Roman was trying to give me scenarios where Adon had perpetrated this crime. Adon is doing his best he can to separate himself from the crime.
It's extremely important for the family members that we get justice for them. This was an incredibly violent crime, and we wanted the person that pulled that trigger.
When I found out Raphael was slurred out because someone needed help, it was just horrible. Why would you lie to him like that?
We wanted a conviction for the community, for the family, so we requested that Adon take a polygraph. There's no way that we can give Raphael back, but what we can do is solve the crime and send the perpetrators to prison.
Police now have 2 suspects in custody for the shooting of Rafael Hernandez Torres, Roman Medrano, and Adon Mora Ramos.
Ultimately, to come back to these 2 people was something that we never saw coming.
Adon's unexpected involvement in the murder gives police a valuable way to secure a conviction. To ensure he's telling the truth, police have Adon submit to a polygraph test.
During the interview with Adon, he explained to us that Roman wanted him to be at a certain location to help him with a job of some sort.
They went out to the area where the homicide had occurred, and they were there drinking some beer and just hanging out.
Adon doesn't really know what's going on. He's asking Roman, what are we doing? How are we going to get this money? Well, Roman keeps walking off, and he's on the phone. He makes a phone call where Adon can't hear him. After a period of time, Adon sees Raphael's silver car pulling down where they're at.
Raphael believed that he was going to help a friend who had gotten into an accident.
It was Roman's cell phone that made the call to lure Raphael out to the rural secluded area.
According to Adon, Raphael drank a few beers with them, and then Roman asked for his help jump-starting his car.
Roman directed Raphael's vehicle to pull down and give him a jump. Roman tells Adon to take the jumper cables and hook them up to the cars.
Adon tells investigators that what happened next took him by surprise.
Adon is trying to hook up the cables under the hood of the car, and he hears the gunshots. He looks up and says that he sees Roman standing over Raphael, and that Raphael has been shot several times. Adon fingers Roman as the triggerman, as the actual killer.
The polygraph test confirms that Adon is telling the truth.
That was the last piece of evidence that we needed. The information that he gave was truthful. And it became clear that Roman was really the one that had a personal vendetta against Raphael and the financial motive for it. But we knew Adon participated. We knew he helped out with it. Adon admitted that he put Raphael's body in the trunk and helped push the vehicle into the river. And Adon said he was afraid that Roman was going to shoot him as well.
Adon never says anything about the money. Adon just says he's worried that he's going to be next. Now, he's a witness to this crime.
And so Adon, because of that fear, fled the area shortly after the crime had happened. Ultimately, we charged Adon with accessory and gave him a 15-year sentence. Adon was there. He could have stopped this, and he didn't. He could have cooperated, and he didn't. So he needed to go to prison. Roman entered a plea of no contest to murder in the first degree, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole.
When this investigation started, it was a true whodunit. We weren't certain on who was involved or why they would want Raphael killed.
For such a violent act to be committed over a couple $1,000s and an offhand comment to Roman's wife is unexplainable.
It was a cruel and unusual way of getting back at somebody for being jealous and wanting the things that he had.
Raphael was a generous man, a benevolent man, and they took advantage of that. They knew that he would be willing to help them, and they used that good nature against him and ultimately lured him out there and murdered him.
My whole family felt relieved because we finally got justice from my brother, Raphael, because his dad didn't go in vain.
My feeling and thought about these people was always like, why? Why? What problem did they have with Raphael? I don't know.
Today, the Hernandez-Torres family does everything they can to keep Raphael's memory alive.
Raphael was like a role model for everybody. He was the biggest role model for me because he showed me, even when I'm down, to always get up and fight for what I like.
We just love for Raphael to be remembered as a crazy, funny, flirtatious guy who thought of helping other people. It's always something or someone who remembers Raphael and talk about his life, and we just all start crying. And we wish he was still here. But he's still with us.
A generous soul.
She was a very giving person and a very sharing person.
Who helped neighbors in need.
When they needed extra money for baby food or diapers, Janora was always there.
Is found brutally murdered.
This homicide was one of the most violent homicides that I've worked.
There was blood from basically the floor to the ceiling.
It was something that shocked the community.
Police uncover a sinister trail of deception and hate.
He had some strange tendencies. He seemed to be stalking her.
The polygraph came back with some clear signs that he was being deceptive.
To unveil a killer no one expected.
He made her believe that he was her knight in shining armor, so she never saw it coming.
He had two completely different faces on him. He was just the devil incarnate.
One hot summer morning in the sleepy rural town of Clinton, Louisiana, the sheriff's office gets a call that sends them to a farmhouse just outside of town. It belongs to a woman named Genora Guillory.
When Genora didn't show up for work on Monday morning, her coworkers started to get nervous. They called her cell phone, she didn't answer. They called her landline, and it was busy, it stayed busy. At that point, a friend at work called the sheriff's office in East Feliciana and said, "Would you please go check on our coworker, Genora Guillory?"
The deputy that worked for the East Feliciana Sheriff's Office, he went to the residence to look for her. The door was unlocked. And he discovered the body.
He backed out of the house, and he said he threw up outside. He could barely even speak to the dispatcher. He was so upset by what he found.
Detectives are called to the scene.
You could tell something had happened at the very entrance of the door. There was blood right there on the door handle.
The blood on the floor leads detectives inside the house.
There, you could follow the blood trail, and it went into the kitchen. There were several knives that had blood on them inside of the drawer. There was also evidence like someone tried to use the phone, and there was blood on the side of the phone.
The blood leads to the bedroom, where detectives are met with a gruesome sight. In the middle of the floor lies the lifeless body of 42-year-old Genora Guillory.
You could see evident tears in her skin, which, I mean, we knew at the time were deep stab wounds. She was beaten severely. There was blood from basically the floor to the ceiling.
The lamp was broken and stuff knocked over in the bedroom.
I've seen other homicides that I've worked that this one was more brutal.
The body was also half closed, legs open, and she was pinned against the wall. There was a possibility that she had been raped.
Detectives in this small parish don't investigate many homicides, let alone one this brutal. They call in the Louisiana State Police to help process the scene.
They took some DNA samples of the material that was found under her fingernails.
The samples are sent to the lab to see if there are any traces of the killer's DNA.
We didn't find any type of murder weapons. We found that it was actually no forced entry. We pretty well figured that it was somebody that she knew and had a little bit of trust in to open the door.
As police collect evidence, Genora's neighbors, Philip and Amy Skipper, arrive on the scene.
They were, of course, shocked. Philip's wife, Amy, she was really destroyed, and she was a friend of Miss Guillory's.
Police inform Genora's family. Her brother-in-law, Albert, is the first to get the terrible news.
I received a call from the sheriff's office indicating that Genora was dead, had been murdered, and obviously it was just an unbelievably bad moment. To Genora's sister, my spouse at that time, Yvonne, that was probably the single most devastating moment in her life.
The family rushes to the scene. When they arrive, detectives ask them for any details they can provide about Genora.
Genora grew up in Eunice, Louisiana, a small town in St. Landry Parish. From the time that Genora was a young girl in school, she was a very giving person. She was a very intelligent woman, filled with love for life, filled with love for animals.
Genora worked at an insurance company in Baton Rouge, but chose to live in rural Clinton, where she could indulge in her passion for animals.
She had 30 dogs, she had 3 or 4 horses, she had rescue animals, she took care of friends' animals if they couldn't. Animals were a big part of her life.
Friends were a big part of Genora's life too. She was thrilled when a sweet couple moved in across the street, and they immediately hit it off.
Philip and Amy Skipper moved into her neighborhood, and I felt very comfortable that she had developed this warm relationship with the Skippers.
Over the years, Genora and her neighbors became close friends.
Genora told me how reliable they were and how hardworking they were.
Genora really liked her neighbors, and she thought of the Skippers almost like family.
Now her friends are heartbroken over Genora's violent death, and police are faced with the puzzle of finding her killer.
It made no sense. Genora had no enemies, and she wasn't involved in anything shady or suspicious.
When the autopsy report comes back the next day, it concludes that the murder took place between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. It also reveals just how brutal Genora's final moments were. She was shot 5 times with a .22 caliber gun and stabbed 5 times. But neither of these attacks caused her death.
A severe blow to the back of the head severed her brainstem from her body. She was actually alive, and she was fighting back and was stabbed and shot.
This was one of the most violent homicides that I've worked. It was a very much overkill, which usually means it is a crime of passion.
This was a particularly brutal, dastardly deed. We all stood outside Genora's house that morning and talked about who could possibly have done this.
Despite the concern of Genora's family and friends, detectives can't rule out anyone as a suspect.
We began talking to the neighbors and co-workers, the ones that showed up, and just started trying to get information.
One person in particular draws investigators' attention: Genora's neighbor, Philip Skipper.
Philip was real calm. What really got me was his over wanting to help too much, you know. We just had a feeling Philip knew something.
Coming up, investigators uncover a dark obsession.
He was infatuated with her and couldn't take no for an answer.
And menacing secrets.
They called her names behind her back all the time, but never to her face.
There was an incentive for them to actually murder her.
That leads them to a suspect they never expected.
They went on a tour of the murder scene, and he described the whole thing.
He just blurted out, "Do you have a woman named Mrs. G that was murdered over there?"
After 42-year-old Genora Guillory is found savagely killed in her home, detectives in Clinton, Louisiana suspect that her neighbor, Philip Skipper, might know something about the murder.
Philip was over helpful at the crime scene, and it is something that we wanted to check out more.
Police decide to bring in Philip Skipper and his wife, Amy, for an interview.
Genora really liked her neighbors, and the Skippers had a young child and their stepson, who was 15 years old at the time.
Philip Skipper tells investigators that when his young family first moved to Clinton, they were down on their luck, but their neighbor Janora kindly helped out.
She started to take them under her umbrella and make sure that they had food and made sure that they had electricity.
When the Skippers needed extra money for baby food or diapers, Janora was always there. The trailer they were living in, for example, was really dilapidated, so Janora helped them buy a new trailer. She helped them improve their lives as much as she could.
Janora's kindness didn't stop there.
She started to employ Philip to do all of the work in her yard and around the house, and employed Amy Skipper to do the work inside her house.
Janora treated the Skippers like family and trusted them with keys to her property.
She was just a very, very generous neighbor.
Detectives want to know if the Skippers ever argued with Janora. Amy Skipper said their relationship had recently been strained by an unfortunate incident.
Philip Skipper was raising pit bulls, and there was one dog that was not a pit that didn't get along with his other pit bulls, and Janora agreed to keep that in her kennel with her dogs. Well, that dog somehow got loose during the day while Janora was at work. The dog ran back to the Skipper's trailer and killed a goat they kept as a pet. Amy Skipper ran over to Janora's house, got on the phone, called Janora at work, and was upset with Janora. Now that's witnessed by a couple of Janora's co-workers who heard Janora's end of the conversation. She was crying by the end of this phone call. That's how upset Janora was. And Janora told Amy Skipper on the phone, "Leave the key at my house, get out of my house, and never come back."
When police question Philip about the conflict, he tells them that he and Amy had since patched things up with Janora, and they were back on friendly terms.
Philip Skipper was dismissive about the falling out. He said it was just a dispute among neighbors, and they worked it out, and there was no lingering after effects.
Police are skeptical about Philip's version of events, and when they notice scratches on his arms, they wonder if they were made by Janora while trying to fight for her life.
Questioned him about that. He said it was from him and his stepson wrestling in the yard.
Not convinced by his story, investigators ask Philip where he was on the night of the murder.
And he said he was asleep at the time that the murder happened.
To confirm Philip's story, police asked to interview his 15-year-old stepson, John Ballio.
When you interview the juveniles in Louisiana, you had to have permission of the guardian or the parent, which we had. I mean, they did cooperate there and let us talk to them.
When detectives questioned John, they noticed scratches on his arms too. Is it possible Janora fought back against two attackers?
John Ballio had marks on him. He gave us the same story.
John corroborates his stepdad's story, but police are still suspicious.
The marks on their arms was really something that we wanted to check out more if they was being truthful. So after that interview, we did decide to have a polygraph set up.
Philip and John agree to take the test, but before it can be scheduled, investigators uncover a critical detail.
During the course of the investigation, we did learn about an insurance policy Miss Guillory had taken out on herself, and the money would go to the Skippers.
Was an insurance payout reason enough for the Skippers to kill their friend and neighbor?
With a lack of motive, it's really hard to find the killer.
The insurance policy was an incentive for them to actually murder her.
Police have just discovered that murder victim Genora Guillory's neighbors, the Skipper family, are the beneficiaries of Genora's $25,000 life insurance policy.
And it's just kind of unusual that the neighbor would have an insurance policy and list the other neighbor as a beneficiary. They're not related.
The insurance policy raises eyebrows for investigators, but Genora's family is well aware of the policy and does not suspect foul play.
Genora wanted to make sure that the Skippers had the food that they needed, had the clothing that they needed for at least a period of time, should she meet an untimely departure. The Skippers, after Genora's death, did not know how to collect. They contacted me and asked me to assist them, and I did.
Still, police believe the insurance money is a possible motive. That, coupled with the scratches on Philip and John's arms, convinces detectives to take the next step.
Philip Skipper and John Ballio showed up at the Baton Rouge Police Department, which has a polygraphy unit, and they both took separate polygraph tests.
The polygraph interrogator asked 15-year-old John Ballio for an alibi.
John Ballio said he was at home asleep when the murders occurred.
Both John and Philip are asked about their knowledge of the murder by the examiner. And when their responses are analyzed, detectives are surprised by the results.
Both of their tests came back with no real signs of deception.
The results on the polygraphs, they was inconclusive, and the officer that was doing the polygraph didn't think that they had done the murder.
The results are a blow to the investigation, and lead detectives dropped the Skippers as suspects.
We still didn't have no physical evidence, and the polygraph made us think, well, we need to start looking elsewhere.
Detectives interviewed Genora's friends and coworkers about anyone she may have dated recently.
The friend of Miss Guillory's did give us the name of Tommy Alexandra.
Police tracked down Tommy at his home in a nearby town. He agrees to talk to police. Tommy tells investigators that he met Genora months prior at a feed store, where she was stocking up on food for her animals. Genora agreed to meet Tommy for a drink, their first of several dates.
Tommy and Genora had dated on and off for some time.
But it soon became apparent to Genora that Tommy had other love interests.
It turned out Tommy Alexander was not just dating Genora at the time. He was dating a couple of different women.
Genora really liked him, but Tommy didn't want to settle down. He wasn't going to commit to one woman.
Is it possible that an argument between Genora and Tommy could have turned deadly?
We interviewed Tommy about the homicide.
On the night Genora was murdered, Tommy says that he was at home. Police talk to his girlfriend, who confirms his alibi.
They were able to eventually eliminate him as a suspect. As far as physical evidence to tie a specific suspect to the scene, there really wasn't anything. They kept trying to dig for facts, but they were hampered by the fact that, once again, they couldn't figure out why anyone wanted to kill her.
Determined to get justice for Genora, investigators interview her coworkers and discover that she had an ongoing conflict with a man in her life.
We learned about another friend, Steve Williams, from coworkers, and basically what we learned is that he wanted to date Miss Guillory.
But the feeling is not mutual.
Steve Williams managed to persuade Genora to go out one time, and that was enough for her. She didn't want to go out with him again, and she let him know. But he didn't take that no very well.
Miss Guillory had really got concerned about him, according to her friends. He would sit out in the parking lot and wait for her to get off from work, would show up unannounced.
Steve Williams showed up out of the blue while she was working her horses.
He pursued her a little more aggressively than was comfortable for the family.
From coworkers' explanations over there, he seemed to be stalking Genora.
Genora said, "He's bothering me and he needs to stop."
When detectives look into Steve Williams, they're shocked to learn that their potential suspect is one of their own.
Steve Williams was a Baton Rouge police officer.
Detectives have learned that Steve Williams, who had been repeatedly contacting Genora Guillory in the months before her murder, is a fellow police officer.
Steve Williams had recently gotten a job with the Baton Rouge Police Department, and he was a probationary police officer in the next jurisdiction over.
He was infatuated with her, and he was just a guy who couldn't take no for an answer.
Genora's friends knew that she was not interested, and of course after the murder, when the police are asking, well, who may have been upset with Genora, he became a focus of the investigation.
When you investigate law enforcement officers, it's harder than most because they know the law as good as you do. But we did have good cooperation through Baton Rouge City Police Department. Whatever we needed, they was willing to provide.
As investigators gather more information about Steve, they uncover an intriguing tip from one of his colleagues, 29-year-old officer Tabitha McCants.
Tabitha came forward during the investigation, and she had worked with Steve Williams at Baton Rouge Police Office.
It turns out she got kind of a bad vibe from him.
Tabitha tells investigators that she overheard Steve having heated phone conversations with a woman on several occasions while at the police shooting range.
She said they'd make multiple phone calls.
Police need to check Genora's phone records to find out if Genora was the person Steve had been calling. Tabitha also tells investigators that Steve mentioned shooting targets at his mother's home. And when they ask Tabitha if Steve mentioned the type of gun he used, her answer sets off alarm bells.
She says he used a .22, which by this time we found out that .22 was used in the shooting of Miss Guillory.
As a police officer, of course, Steve Williams had firearms. The .22 caliber pistol, which is certainly not a police gun, but he did have a .22, and he shot it at his mother's house.
Based on the history of him stalking Miss Guillory and the access to a .22, that's when we decided that we would check Steve Williams out a little bit more.
When detectives check Genora's phone records, they quickly discover an alarming pattern.
Looking at the phone records, Steve Williams, in my opinion, was stalking Miss Guillory.
The phone records showed 35 calls to Genora's home from the shooting range in 4 months, and an escalating pattern of calls and messages.
Steve Williams had left several messages for Genora the weekend that she was killed. In fact, he told her in a message that he would stop by her house on the day she was killed.
Investigators don't waste a second bringing Steve in for questioning. And when they do, his demeanor has them instantly suspicious.
Steve was real nervous. It was just something about him, like he was hiding something from us.
Steve insists he had nothing to do with Janora's murder and claims he stayed at his mother's house the night Janora was killed.
Steve's mama's residence about 40 minutes away from where the homicide was.
Police believe Janora was murdered between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Could Steve have slipped out undetected while his mother was sleeping?
Janora was shot with a .22 caliber pistol, and the fact that he had a .22, was nearby on the day she was killed, it really put him very high up on the suspect list.
That's when we had him take a polygraph.
Steve's answers are analyzed and the results sent to detectives.
Steve Williams' polygraph examination came back with some clear signs that he was possibly being deceptive.
His polygraph basically told us that he may have known something about the murder. It made me really think that he had something to do with this. That's when Steve advised he wasn't going to talk to us no more. He wanted a lawyer.
Despite Steve's refusal to cooperate, detectives continued to investigate him.
He looked like a good suspect. Now the question would be, can they find the evidence to prove it? They got a warrant for his house, they got warrants for his personal cars, and they got a warrant for his police car. Now, to do that, they had to work with the Baton Rouge Police Department. And the detectives were hoping to recover a .22, knife, anything with blood stains, anything to link him to the crime scene. They didn't find anything.
It's a major setback. But detectives still have one last piece of forensic evidence that they believe could connect Steve Williams to the murder. They get a search warrant for a DNA sample from Steve to see if it's a match for genetic material found on Janora's body.
We had those fingernail scrapings that were taken off her from the State Police Crime Lab.
It was determined, yes, there was some male DNA under her fingernails.
Coming up, investigators zero in on a vicious killer.
I picked out the worst photo that I could find of the crime scene, and I threw it in front of his face and made him look at it, said, did she deserve it?
Police hope to use DNA evidence to link Baton Rouge police officer Steve Williams to Janora Guillory's murder. Steve's DNA is compared to material found under Janora's fingernails.
His DNA was not actually determined to be under her fingernails.
The DNA also doesn't match any known criminals in the FBI database.
The fingernail scrapings came back to a known male genetic profile.
With no physical evidence linking Steve Williams to the crime, he's ruled out as a suspect, leaving investigators at a standstill.
The case had gone cold, and they had no other leads to check into it.
The case stays cold for an entire year.
There was great disappointment and great frustration on the part of the family when the case went cold.
The shock of Janora's murder may have faded, but the community lives in fear of a killer who's still at large.
When a murder occurs, it's very alarming. Everybody's on edge, especially after the case was at a standstill.
Then, on July 27, 2001, a tip comes in that changes everything.
And I got a call on the telephone straight to the office. It was Detective Mark Apperson from Tangipahoa Sheriff's Office. And he just blurted out. He's like, do you have a woman named Mrs. G that was murdered over there? And I just kind of look over at Don, and I said, yeah, we do have a woman named Miss G that was killed.
The detective there was working a domestic violence battery, and the victim had came in and told him that her boyfriend knew something about a murder in Clinton.
The woman tells detectives her boyfriend's name is Donnie Fisher.
We rode over there and found Donnie Fisher. We brought him over there to the Tangipahoa Sheriff's Office.
But Donnie Fisher is not in the mood to talk.
You could tell he knew something. That's when I picked out the worst photo that I could find of the crime scene. And I threw it in front of his face and made him look at it and said, did she deserve it?
Reluctantly, Donnie looks down at the gruesome photos, and moments later, his whole demeanor changes.
He started to break down and cry. And he looked at it, and then he told us, basically, his confession.
Donnie says he heard a detailed account of the murder from one of Janora's neighbors.
The neighbor took Donnie Fisher on a tour of the murder scene.
He said once they got there, he took them and said, this is how it happened.
Investigators are stunned. They question all of Janora's neighbors at the outset of the investigation, but it didn't uncover any useful information or lead to an arrest. Detectives demand that Donnie reveal the neighbor's name.
He said it was John Ballio, Philip Skipper's stepson.
Detectives are shocked. They press Donnie for details. And he claims that John told him about the murder while cleaning up Janora Guillory's house.
Janora Guillory's family had hired John Ballio to go clean up the crime scene. Donnie Fisher, he was out there helping, so as they're cleaning up the house, John Ballio was bragging to Donnie Fisher about how he killed Janora Guillory. John Ballio took Donnie and said, here's what we did here, here's what we did here, and he described the whole thing.
Investigators don't know whether to believe Donnie's story, especially since John Ballio's polygraph was considered truthful. Yet every word of it lines up with the evidence.
John actually showed Donnie how Miss G ran through the house, and talking to Donnie, he described everything that we had put together from what we seen at the crime scene.
Detectives want to know, why would Ballio want Janora dead after all she had done for his family?
Miss Guillory would rather help somebody than hurt somebody, you know. She would do anything she could to help the Skippers.
It's kind of heartbreaking.
Police now believe that Donnie is telling the truth. So they quickly file an arrest warrant.
We picked up John Ballio late on a Friday evening, and we brought him back to East Bleak Center Sheriff's Office for charges of first-degree murder.
Investigators now believe the key to cracking this case is a confession from the alleged killer. Luckily, a recent change in Louisiana state law allows them to question a minor accused of murder without a lawyer or guardian present.
The police had to get John Ballio to come clean and tell the truth.
We brought him to my office and advised him of his rights.
He bounced from here to there during his statements at first when we initially questioned him. And then we started talking about the brutality of this homicide.
After probably an hour and a half interviewing, he finally came and told the story about how he killed Miss G.
But first, Ballio needs to get something off his chest.
He didn't do it by himself.
Pointing the finger right back at Philip Skipper.
Detectives are speechless. John Ballio just implicated his stepdad, Philip, in the murder of Janora Guillory. And that's not all.
He pointed to several other people, too.
Detectives in Clinton, Louisiana have just arrested Philip Skipper's stepson, John Balio, for the murder of 42-year-old Genora Guillory.
John started basically telling us how this went down.
And John claims he didn't act alone. He points the finger at his stepdad, Philip Skipper, and 2 other people.
Johnny Hoyt was a brother-in-law to Philip Skipper, and Lisa Skipper Hoyt was a sister to Philip Skipper. He said they killed this woman together.
Lisa and Johnny, that's the first time their name had ever came up. And we were, of course, shocked.
John Balio gave a detailed confession on videotape to exactly what happened.
John claims that Philip, Johnny, and Lisa had formed a white supremacist gang called the Brotherhood, and that killing Genora was meant to be John's initiation into the group.
It would be my true test of brotherhood.
It was a skinhead gang. Actually, they were very anti-black and neo-Nazi.
Philip Skipper, he had 2 completely different faces on him. I mean, he had the one he presented to Genora Guillory, which was, you know, the nice neighbor. And then behind her back, he called her all kind of names. He hated black people.
He basically made her believe that he was her knight in shining armor. She never saw it coming.
Killing Genora would not only initiate Balio into their gang, but also bring a financial windfall.
Philip Skipper was smart enough to figure out that, hey, if she doesn't like us anymore, it's not going to be very long before she changes that insurance policy and names someone else as beneficiary.
Balio tells detectives that on the night of the murder, the group had been drinking heavily. They arrived at Genora's door at 2 a.m.
When we got there, Lisa walked up to the door and knocked on it and told Miss G that she needed some money to get the baby some diapers.
And Miss G cracked the door open. That's when Johnny hit her and forced his way in there.
They just jumped on her like a pack of hyenas.
She ran through the house, down the hall, screaming for him to leave her alone. And she ran into the kitchen and got to the knife drawer trying to get her knife so she could cut him to make him leave her alone.
Eventually, she ran to her bedroom.
John told us that they took turns stabbing her, and they took turns beating her, and they took turns shooting her.
And then somebody threw the final blow that, according to the medical examiner, killed her instantly. It was a blow with a bat to the head.
Philip started hitting her with the bat. And after Miss G stopped breathing, they started raping her.
John Balio said that they used condoms. There was not an indication of any seminal fluid or any semen at the scene that night.
With no evidence to back up John Balio's claim of sexual assault, the rape charges are dropped. But detectives are still determined to bring Genora's killers to justice.
John Balio's confession gave us enough probable cause to make sure this case got prosecuted.
For cooperating with police, John is given a deal. He pleads guilty to second-degree murder and receives a juvenile life sentence to expire when he turns 21. Lisa Hoyt also takes a plea agreement and is sentenced to 25 years. That leaves Johnny Hoyt and Philip Skipper to face justice in separate trials. When news of the arrests gets out, Genora's family is devastated.
When the family found that Philip and John were involved, they were really, really upset and angry that the people that Genora had taken care of so diligently were the ones involved in her murder.
The prosecutors are determined to bring Janora's killers to justice, but they have a problem. There's no concrete evidence linking either Philip or Johnny to the crime scene.
There was some male DNA under her fingernails, but it did not match the samples that we had from the 3 males in this case.
Both cases rest entirely on the testimony of John Ballio.
John Ballio walked us through what happened that night, and that was crucial for our case. He actually brought everything together and made the whole situation make sense to a jury. It was Philip Skipper's trial. The jury came back with a unanimous verdict. He was guilty of second-degree murder.
Philip Skipper is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Philip's wife, Amy, is not charged with any crime.
A lot of times people ask, what about Amy? What about Amy? Amy Skipper had no idea what her husband was doing.
I genuinely believe that Amy Skipper did not have any knowledge of what was going to take place. I believe that she had nothing to do with this.
Johnny Hoyt was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years without the possibility of parole. But for the family of Janora Guillory, no punishment could possibly make up for the pain they suffered in the wake of her murder.
Janora's father died of a broken heart. It was just a very, very difficult time for everyone in that family. I'd like for people to remember Janora as we knew her, warm and happy, and someone who would give the shirt off her back to anyone who needed it. We are all happy to have had our lives enriched by her passage through this life.
A vibrant young woman with a bright future.
She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty, but also very smart.
Is the victim of a truly disturbing murder.
He'd been struck on the head many times.
It's kind of the horror story.
The body itself appeared to have been washed. Jewelry had been put on her after the fact.
She had been staged for this suspect's desires. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her?
Detectives hunt for a deranged killer.
We noticed bloodied palm print.
Police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
We could be looking for a serial killer.
Just when it looks like justice may never be served.
It was extremely frustrating.
A stunning discovery points to a murderer in their midst.
When we found out who it was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Less than an hour outside Los Angeles, Irvine, California is a peaceful community with a coastal vibe.
Irvine is very, very pretty. It is pretty much the hub of Orange County. The ocean's only 10 minutes away, and this is where everybody wanted to be.
Irvine has always been considered to be a very safe city and has not been known for violence.
On May 14th, 1979, Irvine's sense of safety is shattered when a man calls 911 to say he can't get a hold of his 22-year-old girlfriend, Savannah Anderson.
Earlier that day, her boyfriend went over to her residence to meet her at about 6 o'clock. He couldn't get any response at the door.
He went back home for a while, couldn't get a hold of her still.
He called the police department about 7:25 p.m. It was a welfare check. Her boyfriend indicated that she had not been feeling well, and so there was a concern that it could be a health issue. When the officer arrived, he met her boyfriend, Bill Mills, and another man, Ken Bergenson, who identified himself as her boss.
They explained they'd both come to the apartment to try to find out if she was okay because nobody'd been able to get a hold of her that day.
I was very fortunate to work with Savannah. Savannah was always prompt, and she didn't come that day. All day long, it was like trying to get a hold of her, no answers. By the end of the day, we were very concerned something might have happened because that wasn't like her.
The officer found the apartment was in fact locked up tight. There was no key available from the apartment office. The officer found out that a bedroom window nearby was unlocked from the inside. He was able to open that bedroom window.
When the officer made entry, he was able to see a woman with a lot of blood around her, lying in bed, towels wrapped around her face and head. She was cold to the touch.
Both Savannah's boyfriend and boss are taken to the station for questioning, while homicide investigators are called to the scene.
When I walked in, it appeared to me that there was a struggle, a fight, and it was very clear that she was attacked on the bed, and she laid on the bed for some time due to the amount of blood that had pooled in that area. A lot of blood splattering against the back of the wall and the headboard.
She also had towels over her face. After the towels were taken off, her face was found out to be beaten very severely, excessively.
The towels were significant. It tells you that the killer may have known her and didn't want to look at what they've done.
It appeared that the body of the victim had been beaten with something hard.
She had multiple defensive marks on her arms, her hands, nail marks around the neck area, which would indicate that she also had a ligature that had been placed around her neck.
The legs were slightly raised as if some sexual activity may have occurred there.
Perhaps she was the victim of a sexual assault.
The degree of violence to Savannah's body was unusual. Did somebody do it because they were angry at her? If they were angry at her, is that because they knew her, they loved her, they hated her?
Based on the state of the body, police believe Savannah was likely killed in the early hours of the morning. Looking closer, several details strike investigators as highly unusual.
Savannah had some jewelry on her. There was a necklace around her neck, and the clasp was at the front. There was also a watch on her arm that looked like it had just been put on there loosely.
We were surprised to see that those items were still intact on her based upon the brutality of her attacker. So it appeared that he may have just put those items back on her.
The body itself appeared to have been washed, as there's very little blood on the skin surface of the victim.
We noticed drag marks from the bed onto the carpet leading into the bathroom. Inside the bathroom, there was diluted blood with water around the sink area and also the bathtub.
She looked like she had been cleaned up and set in a particular position on the bed. It was staged for this suspect's desires. And I think that was important to get an idea of what this type of person was willing to do to Savannah's body, put things on her, put clothes on her, whatever.
It was very unusual for any type of murder, in my opinion. It looks like somebody wanted to make it look like she was fine and nothing was wrong.
Police find some important clues the killer left behind.
We noticed bloodied palm print leading from the bedroom into the bathroom. Palm prints are identifiable just like fingerprints. There were smudged, bloodied fingerprints on the toilet seat.
They were basically the only way that we'd be able to find out who the killer might have been. There was no DNA at the time.
Detectives find no murder weapon or any sign of forced entry.
We made the determination that the killer may have been known by Savannah and let him in through the front door. Another theory was through an unlocked open window.
After finishing up at the scene, detectives break the news of Savannah's death to her loved ones.
The parents lived in Utah. When I spoke to Savannah's mother on the phone, she was devastated by this. It was her only child. It's probably hard for most people to realize, first of all, what it's like to lose a child, let alone the only child you have. Savannah's mother said Savannah had made a collect call to her about 10 o'clock the previous day on Mother's Day evening. They had talked on the phone for about 2 hours. Savannah was very happy, good mood. That must have made it even more so difficult.
When I found out what had happened to Savannah, we were all totally shocked. My heart just hurt so much. How very sad this beautiful young lady, her life was gone. It's very senseless, very, very hard to understand.
Born in 1956, Savannah Anderson grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and had big dreams.
She was 22 when she moved to Irvine. She came here looking for a better opportunity. She was very independent, and she wanted to do it on her own. I met Savannah when she was working here for Commercial Credit. Savannah was a secretary for the operations manager. She just was like a magnet. She was very, very pretty. I remember when people did come in the office, especially the men, she did attract attention.
Savannah was flattered, but she did have a boyfriend, Bill Mills, whom she met 3 months after moving to California.
She was more of a private person into herself as far as not one to just open up and tell everybody what she was doing. She was definitely on the shy side. When I found out what had happened to Savannah, I felt angry and just crushed and so hurt. My first thought was just how tragic this was. I just can't imagine.
It's kind of the horror story. Who could have done this? Could it be somebody close to her, somebody who knows her, somebody who likes her, somebody who has a fantasy over her? When you have a brutal killing like Savannah's case, detectives immediately looked for the people that are close to her, her boyfriend.
The fact that Bill, the boyfriend, was the one that called the police, is he innocently calling the police here because he doesn't know that something had happened to her? Or is he the one who may have done it, so he contacted the police to say, gee, something might be wrong, with the hopes that the police will go ahead and discover the crime and then say, well, it can't be the boyfriend because he called us here. Could it be almost a way out to try to point the finger away from you? It's just something you have to look into.
Coming up, police question the grieving boyfriend to see if he has something to hide.
His attorney advised him not to take a polygraph.
And detectives uncover more suspects.
Why is he here now at this time? That was suspicious.
Somebody was lying.
Another crime turns the investigation on its head.
This individual was responsible for 5 murders. Perhaps she was the victim of this killer.
And the perpetrator's identity leaves everyone in shock.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of 22-year-old Savannah Anderson have their first suspect, her boyfriend, Bill Mills.
When you have a crime of passion where somebody is murdered, there are definitely times when a boyfriend who just got angry and upset did the crime.
The first thing we did was began meeting with Bill Mills so we could understand better about Savannah, his relationship.
Bill tells police he and Savannah started dating 6 months ago, and he was in love.
They had met each other in another apartment community. They had gotten along well.
He was about 9 years older than Savannah. In talking with him, had learned that he had just asked her to marry him.
Police are curious if something came up to disrupt the couple's plans for the future.
It was a large, violent crime scene. Did he do it because he was angry at her?
Bill tells investigators he last saw Savannah a day earlier on May 13th.
They had brunch together, and then he spent the day over at her apartment. During the interview with Bill Mills, we found out that Savannah and he did have sex that day. So that would be important later on in case there was semen found inside of her.
Bill told me on the 13th he left her apartment at about 10 p.m.
Once he did leave, what happened to him? Can anybody account for his activity after he apparently left her apartment?
He said he went home, he went to bed, and then to work the following day.
Bill says he and Savannah had plans on the 14th after they both got off work.
He went to her apartment about 6, knocked, couldn't raise her. He went back home for a while, then Bill Mills went ahead and contacted the police department.
Bill denies having anything to do with Savannah's death.
It appeared that Bill Mills was really in love with her, thought it was a very serious relationship. He was very happy with her.
Bill was cooperative. He tried to assist us as much as he could.
But there is one request Bill won't comply with.
There is a red flag. He was asked if he would be willing to take a polygraph. He contacted an attorney, and his attorney advised him not to take one.
We did ask if we could see his body, his hands, his arms, see if there's any indications of a struggle with anybody. But his body was clean. We asked him if we could go ahead and take his finger and palm prints. He agreed to let us do that.
It will be weeks before the results come in. In the meantime, detectives are forced to let Bill go. Next, they move on to another man in Savannah's life.
Part of the investigation and process was to meet with her boss, Ken Bergeson, who had been at the crime scene. In speaking with him, he said he had known her in Salt Lake and had offered her a job locally here.
Ken Bergeson also said that he kind of considered himself a father figure to her. He helped her move. They had talked many times, been out for drinks, been out for lunch and different things.
Could Ken have wanted more than a professional relationship with Savannah?
Was anything going on romantically in the present day?
I asked Ken where he was the night of May 13th, and he indicated that he was with his wife that whole evening.
We did contact the wife to verify that, and there's no reason to believe that he was anywhere but at his home that night.
After the interview, we asked Ken to submit his prints so they could be compared against the crime scene.
We just let him go home that night after the interview.
The police questioned each one of us in the office. I worked for Ken Bergeson at the time. He was just such a nice guy and so concerned about her. She was living by herself, and she was just so beautiful. I just thought, somebody saw her. Somebody was either stalking her or something happened. But I was just so angry that somebody could possibly do something like this. It had to have been somebody I thought who was very sick.
There was nothing really that drew anyone's attention to any issues that Savannah had at work, and nothing came of it.
Police canvassed the apartment complex the next day, searching for witnesses.
We didn't find anyone that said that they'd heard any struggle or screams to corroborate when that attack may have occurred. There were 2 security guards that were assigned to the complex. It was a multi-unit, under construction.
So after I got the names of the security personnel who worked that night, which was about a week after we originally responded out there, I talked to the security guard first who worked the midnight to 6:30 shift. His name is Chuck Doyle.
According to Doyle, security was hired to ensure the residents were safe and to overlook any construction sites and that sort of thing for theft.
Chuck tells investigators on a usual shift he would drive through the complex and also patrol by foot.
I asked him how he found out about the murder of the woman, and he said he found out through the company. I asked him if he knew the lady who lived there, showed him 2 pictures, and he picked out the picture of Savannah Anderson.
When asked about his dealings with Savannah, Chuck's answer gives investigators cause for concern.
He indicated about a month prior that he'd helped Savannah gain entry into her apartment and slid a window open for her.
It was notable that Mr. Doyle had said he was aware that at least at that time one of the windows was unlocked.
Doyle said, "You'll find my fingerprints on Savannah's window, and this is the reason why." Immediately, we printed him. It really made me zero in on him as a potential suspect.
A week after Savannah Anderson was found bludgeoned to death in her bed, security guard Chuck Doyle has drawn suspicion after admitting that his fingerprints are likely on her unlocked window.
She had locked herself out of her apartment before, contacted him while he was on the site to see if he could help her get into the apartment. The security did not have any pass keys. He found that a window was unlocked. He was able to slide the window open. He also said that he didn't go inside. It could be for a couple of reasons. Could be perfectly innocent that he didn't go inside. Could also be to say, well, I didn't go inside if he may have somehow be involved in the death.
Had Chuck slipped in through the same unlocked window to kill Savannah? Police press him for his movements that night.
Chuck Doyle said that he reported for duty on the 14th at midnight, or was supposed to, indicated that he was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes late.
He was supposed to replace a security guard named Bob Sellers.
He drove by Savannah's and saw her talking on the phone. He thought maybe that was around 12:15 or so, 12:20, but was not certain.
He went and parked next to Bob Sellers' car. About 12:30, he estimated, Sellers approached. He got daily reports from Sellers, and then Sellers went ahead and got in his car and drove off.
When detectives ask what happened next, Chuck's answer raises even more suspicion.
He said he drove around a while, went back to the carport, and went to sleep, which would seem very odd.
He thought he probably nodded off for a while.
Doyle says that he was awoken by a car door slam. It was Sellers who had returned and invited him to breakfast. Doyle says it was maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. They went to breakfast at Spire's restaurant, a 24-hour cafe.
The cafe is just 10 minutes from the complex.
Doyle said that he was dropped off by Sellers at about 2:30 in the morning.
Chuck says the rest of his shift was uneventful, and he clocked out at 6:30 a.m.
There's just something really unusual about the sequence of events that's being described by Doyle.
Investigators are left with more questions than answers. Did Savannah die on Chuck's watch? Or was he the one who killed her? Hoping for clarity and to corroborate Chuck's story, they turn to the other security guard, Robert Sellers.
Robert Sellers enlisted into the Marine Corps at age 17. He's 22 now.
He was assigned that day to work from about 4 in the afternoon, and he was supposed to get off at about midnight that night. I asked him if he knew who Savannah Anderson was. He said he had talked to both her and her boyfriend that evening.
Sellers told me that he thought he saw Savannah around 10 p.m. on the phone.
Robert confirms that Chuck was late for work, so he didn't leave the apartment complex until around 12:30 a.m.
After leaving Doyle, he then went home, showered.
As a U.S. Marine, he was supposed to go to a Marine base at 6 o'clock in the morning.
He decided it wasn't worth trying to go to sleep, so he thought, well, I'll just go out to breakfast with Doyle. So that's when he returned.
Sellers told me that he came back to the complex about 3:30, which is an hour and a half or 2 hours after what Doyle recalled this happening. So there was this inconsistency between the both of them about what time they must have gone to the restaurant. Sellers said there's a waitress named Gail who waited on him. I took note of that. At the end of the Sellers interview, we asked if he would go ahead and give us finger palm prints, which he agreed to.
Investigators hope the autopsy report can help them pinpoint Savannah's time of death.
According to the coroner's report, Savannah Anderson died at approximately 2 a.m. on May 14th. The cause of death was strangulation.
She'd been struck on the head many times, found multiple contusions on her face. There was broken fingernails, a broken jaw, cracked teeth.
We did have biological fluids, semen, that was found, but DNA was not in existence at the time, so we didn't have that tool.
My first thought was just how horrible to die like that. I cried and I was just very upset, just thinking that something like that had happened to a person that was just so lovely. It was just terrible.
If Savannah was killed at 2 a.m., which security guard is telling the truth? Was Chuck really off site like he claimed? Or was Robert right, meaning Chuck was at the apartment complex when the murder took place?
There was a wide gap and discrepancy between their two stories and timing. So the two were brought in together to try and determine if someone was mistaken about times.
They both basically stuck to their stories. I wasn't sure which either timeline might have been correct, whether it might have been Doyle's or Sellers, because they were just too far apart. So we thought at that time somebody was lying.
Detectives are investigating the disturbing murder of Savannah Anderson. The two security guards from her apartment complex are unable to agree where they were at 2 a.m. when Savannah was killed.
The timing is very sketchy between what Doyle says and what we learned from Sellers.
This is raising a lot of flags to me, because why don't they know where they were and what time they were?
Going over time discrepancies, Doyle said, well, I slept, I could be mistaken, I'm not sure. So Sellers seemed to be more credible time-wise.
According to Robert Sellers, Chuck was on duty at 2 a.m. and the pair only went to Spire's restaurant around 3:30 a.m.
I asked one of the patrol guys to go ahead and try to contact any waitress there that might have been named Gail to see if she recalled the security guys coming in there at all. They weren't able to find a Gail that worked at the Spire's restaurant, so we could not identify that particular part of the story. It looked like the best chance of us determining who the suspect was going to be through the fingerprint and palm print evidence left behind. At this time, we already had fingerprints and palm prints from the boyfriend, Bill Mills, the boss, Ken Bergerson, and from the two security guards, Chuck Doyle and Bob Sellers. And I felt that if we can find out if any of those were the palm prints, that's going to be the resolution of our case. We'd be able to determine who had done it. So we sent them away with high hopes that we're going to be able to resolve the case once we get the results back.
While waiting for the results, investigators dig deeper into Savannah's life, hoping something will point to her killer.
Savannah seemed to be a very likable person who had, from all reports, a good mind, good IQ, personable, funny, one that you would be very happy to have as a daughter.
She was very sweet, very sophisticated, quiet. She had very strong values and morals. You know, she was just not one of those that was going to be out looking for trouble. Just how she went and how young she went is so tragic. Our world is, it's cruel.
We interviewed neighbors. Savannah had been at the apartment complex about 6 weeks. Her contacts, friends were very limited. What I learned through investigation was Savannah had moved deliberately for the safety of having security on the premises.
She really wanted a place that felt safe, and the fact that they had security, she loved that aspect of it. She felt really good about where she was going.
2 months after Savannah's death, police received the results of the finger and palm print analysis from the scene.
I was really hoping we heard back from the crime lab that it's going to be one of the guys we'd already talked to.
in terms of identification and finding and identifying that individual. It was everything.
None of the prints that came back were any of the fingerprints submitted from the bloody finger and palm prints. Really disappointing. Couldn't figure out why. It seemed like there should have been somebody in there that was responsible for it, yet the crime lab is telling us that these weren't the responsible parties at all. We thought we had some viable suspect, but we're told, nope, it's not them. Well, now what? Wow.
The results mean Savannah's boyfriend, her boss, and the 2 security guards are all cleared.
I was very discouraged, but thought, okay, we just haven't come across the perpetrator. He's out there. We'll find him. We'll identify him. I feel comfortable with that based on the palm print.
Detectives immediately looked for people in the area that maybe had criminal histories. They looked at people that had been arrested after that for similar type of break-in crimes. And if they had any suspicions whatsoever, they would get their palm print and their fingerprints, and they'd compare them to the crime scene prints and then rule them out if they didn't match.
3 months after the crime, police had collected about 100 different print impressions.
The palm prints didn't match. It was extremely frustrating to work through this.
With the case threatening to turn cold, detectives refuse to quit and take the case in a chilling new direction.
After going through potential suspects that were eliminated through the palm print, we began to examine that Savannah Anderson may be the victim of a serial killer known as the Bedroom Basher. This individual was responsible for 5 murders in the Orange County area at the time.
With a population under 2 million people, the number of attacks in a matter of months is troubling, and the similarities striking.
He would target young lone females between 17 and 35, ground floor apartments, open windows, open doors. Once inside, he would bludgeon, strangle, and sexually assault the females. So Savannah certainly fit that MO. And so we had to take a real strong look at perhaps she was the victim of this individual who had not been identified. We could be looking for a serial killer.
Detectives investigating the brutal murder of Savannah Anderson now believe she may have fallen victim to a serial killer.
Bedroom Basher went after females in homes or apartments in the Orange County area, raped them, in at least one case, killed somebody by bludgeoning them, which is what happened to Savannah.
Based upon the number of bludgeonings in Orange County, which were 5, we felt that there would be another that would take place.
5 months after Savannah's murder, investigators' worst fears are confirmed when the serial killer strikes again.
During this time, there was a woman in Orange County that had been attacked, believed by the Bedroom Basher, who survived and was able to give a description to the police. A composite drawing was made. She described the perpetrator as a male, olive skin, pockmarked face, long hair, mustache, dark eyes, in his late 20s, early 30s. A task force was created in Orange County. Flyers were disseminated to the public and to patrol units. It resulted in multiple contacts of people who believed they knew who this individual was. Unfortunately, none of those resulted in the apprehension of the individual.
A year after the murder, with no arrests and a killer on the loose, women in the area live in a constant state of terror.
The community was definitely impacted by this terrible murder. The news was full of these kind of things, and it did create fear among people. The fact that I was living so close by, it's a little scary.
Any female who resided by themselves took extra precautions to ensure that their windows, doors were in fact locked. Every possibility we looked at, we were unable to make any headway in determining what happened to Savannah Anderson. It was extremely frustrating. There was no one else that we were aware of that could provide any insight and/or potentially could be a suspect.
3 years after Savannah's murder, her case remains unsolved.
After you go through tips, leads, you step back, you re-examine, you say, what did I miss? It's got to be there. What did I miss?
I've started to believe that they just weren't going to find out. And that's terrible to think that something like that could happen and that this person is out there roaming around still.
2 more years pass until a rookie homicide detective takes a renewed interest in the case.
Savannah's case was the first cold case that I ever worked. I was familiar with it because I was in patrol when it happened, and I thought, well, nobody's looked at it for a while. Maybe I should look at it.
A friend of mine who knows Larry Montgomery very well calls him the evidence whisperer.
I was aware he was looking at the Savannah Anderson case, and at one point he came to me and we compared notes on it.
After combing through all the evidence, detectives revisit whether Savannah was a victim of this still unidentified bedroom basher.
The possibility that she was killed by a serial killer was definitely looked at. I was looking at anything that I could use to direct me to a possible suspect. I'm looking at what was done at the crime scene, what did the suspect do with the body, what was maybe in his mind because of what he did.
In comparing Savannah's murder to those committed by the bedroom basher, something just doesn't add up.
The one thing that stood out that was not similar was the cleaning up of the victim.
When I look at a crime scene like this, it's somebody who has a desire for Savannah. She appeared uninjured other than towels on top of her face. It wasn't the gore that he liked. He had to kill her in order to get her into a position where he could fantasize about having an actual relationship with her. This is a real girl now as opposed to a dead body. The question in this case is, who did it? All the people we've looked at and that looked good were not matching the prints. There was one point where I started looking at the security guards to see what they were doing because they were certainly involved in being there at the time. There were very big differences between what Doyle said happened and what Sellers said happened that night. And I thought that was very odd.
I thought at the time that I interviewed Doyle that one of the problems was he may have gone to sleep for a while. That would certainly account for the timeline being different or his uneasiness in talking to us about that particular time period.
Police quickly locate Chuck and bring him in for another interview. His story about what happened the night of the murder is the same, but a few details stand out.
Doyle said that he got to the site probably 10 minutes late. He had not been able to find the person he was supposed to replace yet, Bob Sellers. About 12:30, Doyle saw Sellers come with a shirt in his hand, and I asked Doyle, did you ever ask him why he was late or why he didn't have his uniform shirt on? He said, no, he never asked him that. He just figures he's on his own time, so he could probably wear whatever he wants.
That's unusual. That right there's a big red flag.
That's not the only thing that raises alarm bells.
Doyle said that Sellers had commented about wanting to have a drink with Savannah. He thought she was very attractive.
Detectives asked Chuck Doyle if Robert Sellers ever confided anything else to him.
Regarding the relationship between Doyle and Sellers, they weren't buddies. They didn't do things together. They weren't really close friends.
Following this lead, investigators asked Chuck if it was common for them to go for breakfast during a shift, like they did the night of the murder.
They never did that before. So why is Sellers there on a night when he's supposed to leave soon to go to work at a Marine base, saying, hey, you want to go get something to eat? It didn't seem to fit. But I had the paperwork that shows that he had been exonerated. It wasn't his print. But I saw all kinds of things that Sellers did that was suspicious. Why is he here now at this time? It all fits if he came back and did something with the body at that time. It all made sense time-wise. And that's when I decided we need to find those prints again and see if we matched them properly.
5 years after Savannah Anderson was found murdered in her apartment, cold case investigators suspect her killer has been hiding in plain sight the entire time.
I've got a suspicion that this guy, Robert Sellers, might be the guy because there's too many lies or mistakes. He's already been exonerated, and I didn't believe the exoneration. We need to find somebody who's better than our sheriff's department, who's best in the world that we can get.
Robert's prints and the ones found at the crime scene are rushed to FBI headquarters.
The FBI discovered that some parts of the palm print were so thick with blood that it became a negative. It was the opposite of what it should be because of the thick blood. The thick blood looked like the ridges when really they were the valleys of the print.
The FBI reanalyzed the palm print and compared it to prints obtained from Robert.
The next day, the fingerprint lab at the FBI was able to identify in about 24 points of identification a positive identification of security guard Bob Sellers.
We have to arrest him now. Sellers, at the time he was arrested, was living in a mobile home up in Brea at the police department. He was presented with evidence that his prints are in fact in the blood there. He didn't come forward right away, but very quickly after he had some lies, he did admit that he did everything that we thought he did.
He was obsessed with her. He found her very attractive. He thought perhaps by going into her apartment that he might convince her of some romantic get-together. He gained entry into her apartment through an unlocked window where he could hear her on the telephone talking with her mother. He stayed in the bedroom hid as best possible while she talked in the kitchen living room area. Once she got off the phone at about a little after 12, she came into the bedroom. When she saw him, she was thinking, I have an intruder, a man in here, and I'm frightened. And he became frightened and realized that he had to silence her. He pulled out his baton and began striking her. He then went to strangulation.
During the struggle with Savannah, he said that his shirt got bloody, so he had to take it off. So when he went to see Doyle, he had his shirt in his hand so that his replacement would not see the blood on it.
And then he goes home, gets cleaned up, sneaks back in, and then goes into Savannah's apartment. Sellers wanted her sexually. He had to kill her to get that. He did talk about he wanted her to be clean, and so that's why he drug her into the shower and washed the blood off of her and took her back into the bedroom and wrapped her head in towels because she was so badly beaten. So then he just had a body that was clean and he could have his fantasy. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he's trying to sneak out, and that's when Doyle sees him, and that's when, at the spur of the moment, he has to all of a sudden pretend like, oh, I'm here to go to breakfast with you, okay? He almost seemed relieved when he finally was able to confess that he actually did kill Savannah.
On March 29th, 1984, Robert Sellers is charged with murder, rape, attempted rape, and burglary.
I think after 5 years, he thought he probably did get away with it. In that time, he got married, started a family. The anguish that he caused with Savannah Anderson's death, he didn't deserve having that extra 5 years.
On November 4th, 1986, Robert Sellers is found guilty of first-degree murder and a special circumstance of rape. But his lawyers win his appeal.
His conviction was overturned on a technicality. The fact that the prosecution could not prove that she was alive during the rape changed the verdict for a life without possibility of parole.
Instead of a retrial, prosecutors offer Robert a deal. He accepts to avoid the death penalty and pleads guilty to first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Here you have a guard, a man, a Marine, placed there to protect the residents, and it turned out he is the one committing the crime. one would not expect the one who is protecting you to be your killer.
It was absolutely devastating when we found out who it was. The irony of it all was the fact that she moved to this beautiful apartment complex thinking she was going to be safe and secure. And it was the security guard that actually did it. It was like, are you kidding? Nobody could believe it.
Authorities don't find anything to link Robert Sellers to the bedroom basher killings. In 1996, Gerald Parker was identified and convicted of those crimes. In 1999, Robert Sellers died in prison.
I do feel there was justice, especially when I found out that he died after he had been in prison. That was justice right there. When I remember Savannah, I think of this beautiful young woman, just the prettiest smile. She was very, very poised. I think she would have definitely had a bright future had her life not been taken in any sense of the manner, whether she had married and had a family or gone on in the business world. She just was a very lovely person.